Tonight, we're exploring every member of the Order of the Phoenix. This story has many layers, but I'll keep the narration soft and calm so you can still drift off. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. In an old photograph, a group of witches and wizards stands together, young enough to look almost untouched by war. James Potter smiles beside Lily Evans. Sirius Black leans into the frame. Remus is there, along with the brothers Gideon and Fabian Prewett, Marlene McKinnon, Dorcas Meadows, Caradoc Dearborn, Benji Fenwick, and others whose names would soon become entries in a long and painful list of losses. This was the original Order of the Phoenix, founded by Albus Dumbledore during Voldemort's first rise to power in the 1970s. It was not an official branch of the Ministry, and it carried no public badge or identifying mark. Its members were simply people willing to stand against a movement that had made fear feel ordinary. The Order of the Phoenix protects opponents of Voldemort. That simple purpose shaped every part of its work. They watched suspected Death Eaters. They gathered intelligence. They protected families in hiding. They searched for allies among groups that had been pushed aside by wizarding society, including giants, goblins, and werewolves. And because Voldemort's followers were everywhere, trust was often as valuable as magic. Dumbledore stood at the center of it all. To the outside world, he was the headmaster of Hogwarts, an eccentric and brilliant old wizard with half-moon spectacles and a reputation for unusual kindness. But to the Order, he was a strategist, a protector, and the one person Voldemort feared in a way he feared almost no one else. Around Dumbledore gathered experienced fighters such as Alastor Moody, the scarred former Auror known as Mad-Eye, and Kingsley Shacklebolt, calm, capable, and quietly formidable. There were people whose courage looked more ordinary from the outside. Hagrid, the Hogwarts groundskeeper, Arabella Figg, a squib who kept watch over Harry Potter from Dumbledore's old friend, Daedalus Diggle, with his peculiar hats and loyal heart, and Aberforth Dumbledore, who rarely had much patience for grand causes, yet could never entirely turn away. The photograph cannot show every secret, and some of the most important names are missing from its easy, hopeful stillness. Peter Pettigrew, one of James Potter's closest friends, would betray the Potters to Voldemort. Severus Snape, once a Death Eater, would become one of Dumbledore's most dangerous and difficult sources of information. Even within a resistance built on loyalty, no one could be entirely certain where every shadow ended. The First War took nearly everything from this group. Edgar Bones was killed, along with much of his family. Marlene McKinnon's entire family was murdered. Benji Fenwick was found only in fragments. Caradoc Dearborn vanished, and his body was never recovered. Gideon and Fabian Prewett fought so fiercely that it took several Death Eaters to bring them down. Dorcas Meadows was killed by Voldemort himself. Then, on Halloween night in 1981, James and Lily Potter died, protecting their infant son. Voldemort fell, at least for a time, and the surviving members of the Order scattered back into quieter lives. Some carried injuries, some carried grief. Frank and Alice Longbottom were left permanently broken after being tortured by Bellatrix Lestrange and her companions. And Sirius Black was sent to Azkaban for a crime he had not committed. For 14 years, the Order seemed to belong to the past. Then Voldemort returned. On the night of the Triwizard Tournament's final task, Harry Potter came back from a graveyard with the truth. Voldemort had a body again. Cedric Diggory was dead, and the old war, which so many had hoped was over, had quietly begun anew. Dumbledore called the Order back together. Their headquarters became Number 12, Grimmauld Place, the inherited black family home hidden behind powerful magic. There, beneath dark portraits and heavy curtains, old survivors and new recruits gathered for another impossible task. They sent messages by Patronus, watched the Ministry, guarded a prophecy, and tried to keep one boy alive while the world argued over whether the danger was real. The faces had changed. Nymphadora Tonks joined them, bright-haired and clumsy in small ways, but fearless when it mattered. Arthur and Molly Weasley opened their home and their family to the cause. Sturgis Podmore, Emmeline Vance, Hestia Jones, and Mundungus Fletcher each played their part, however unevenly. And always, somewhere near the center of the storm, was Severus Snape, moving between two sides and carrying secrets that could save lives or destroy them. The Order of the Phoenix was never a perfect family. It was a family of teachers, Aurors, parents, outcasts, spies, thieves, werewolves, and survivors. It endured because its members kept choosing one another, even when the cost became almost unbearable. There is a single photograph that holds the weight of an entire war. Harry Potter first sees it in the sitting room at 12 Grimmauld Place, a faded image of the original Order of the Phoenix. And standing behind him, scarred and watchful, is Alastor Moody. He does not just look at the faces. With his magical eye fixed on the same piece of paper, he reads their fates out loud, one by one. The room is full of young faces, and Moody names the smiling members who would be murdered, broken, or betrayed. James Potter, who would be killed on a Halloween night. Lily Evans, who made the choice to stand in the way. Sirius Black, who would spend 12 years in Azkaban for a crime he did not commit. The photograph introduces them all in a single, frozen moment of hope. But Moody knows exactly where every single path leads. As he speaks, a question settles into the quiet of the room, a question that hovers over the whole of this first war. Who were these people? Who decided, before Harry Potter was even born, that standing against Voldemort was worth the risk of being in this photograph? The question digs deeper than simple curiosity. It is the central mystery of the original Order, the reason their stories still carry so much weight. They were the first soldiers. They volunteered when the outcome was completely unknown. The photograph cannot be understood without understanding that choice. These were not hardened veterans of a long war. They were students, newlyweds, shopkeepers, and ministry workers. They joined the Order when Voldemort was at the height of his power, when fear had become ordinary. To be in this photograph was to accept that your face might be one of the ones that never got old. Moody's voice moves from face to face. Edgar Bones, killed along with much of his family. Marlene McKinnon, her entire family murdered. Benji Fenwick, found only in fragments. For each smile, there is a tragic end. Gideon and Fabian Prewett fought so fiercely that it took a crowd of Death Eaters to bring them down. Dorcas Meadows was killed by Voldemort himself. Caradoc Dearborn vanished, his body never recovered. The photo is a map of a massacre, but it is also a testament. Every single person in that image had to look at the person next to them and wonder if they would hold, or if they would break. In a war against an enemy who could read minds and control wills, trust was often more valuable than magic. The Order of the Phoenix protects opponents of Voldemort. That was the mission. But the price of protection was usually a life. There is another layer to the photograph. One that Moody does not need to speak aloud because the silence says it all. The photograph shows who was willing to die, but it also hides the ones who betrayed them. Peter Pettigrew is not in the picture, though he was one of James Potter's closest friends. Severus Snape is not in the picture, though he would later become one of the Order's most valuable spies. The photograph is honest about how many fell, but it keeps the secrets of how they fell. This gathering of young faces is the heart of the story. The original Order of the Phoenix was built by Dumbledore, but it was carried by these ordinary, extraordinary people. They did not have the protection of fame or the guarantee of victory. They had only each other and the conviction that standing against the darkness was the only choice that mattered. The central question of that evening in Grimmauld Place is not just about the past. It echoes into the future. Who stands against the darkness when there is no chosen one to lead them? The answer is a room full of young people in an old photograph, smiling, unaware of how many of them will never grow old. And in that silence, as Moody's voice fades, the full measure of their sacrifice begins to settle. The photograph is an anchor to the past, but every single person in it was connected to someone else. James and Lily led to Harry, Sirius led to Harry, the Prewetts led to the Weasleys, the Bones led to Susan Bones. The McKinnons vanished completely, leaving nothing behind. Each face in that photograph is a thread in the larger tapestry of the war, and understanding those threads is the only way to truly understand what the Order of the Phoenix was fighting for. The resistance they built did not end in that sitting room. It simply changed shape. It became a legacy carried by the next generation. In that faded photograph, Moody's voice does not just list the names of the dead. He is reciting the cost of a war that most of the wizarding world refused to believe was happening. The smiling faces of James, Lily, Sirius, Remus, they stare out from a time before the world turned completely dark, and it forces a question upon us. Why did they need to form this secret army in the first place? What was the fundamental flaw in their world that made the Order of the Phoenix a necessity? To understand the answer, you have to understand the wizarding world of the 1970s. It was an era defined by a creeping, all-consuming dread. Voldemort's power was rising like a dark tide, and unlike a natural tide, this one was deliberate and malevolent. His followers had burrowed into the very heart of the government. In the 1970s, Voldemort's followers infiltrate the ministry, terrorize families, and vanish without consequence. The Aura office was compromised. The Wizengamot was corrupted. You could not trust the paper. You could not trust your neighbor. The Imperious Curse allowed evil to wear the mask of the ordinary. Families who spoke out against the Dark Lord were found dead in their homes, and no one was ever held accountable. The official response from the ministry was a study in frightened futility. They issued pamphlets, they formed committees, but they could not stop the disappearances. The terror was absolute. Albus Dumbledore watched this, and he understood that the old ways were failing. The ministry was not just weak, it was poisoned. It could not be the shield it was meant to be. And so, Albus Dumbledore forms a secret resistance for those willing to oppose the Dark Lord openly. This was the only path left. He knew that the light cannot coexist with the dark without a fight. He understood that the battle would be won or lost in the shadows. Dumbledore gathered the brightest lights of their generation. He gave them a purpose and a leader. They met in secret, in a grim old house that belonged to Sirius Black's family, a place warded with spells so powerful that Voldemort himself could not find it. Dumbledore was the secret keeper for their headquarters, ensuring their central gathering place remained hidden from even the most powerful dark magic. They shared their lives, their homes, and their children. This was the Order of the Phoenix. Its mandate was brutally simple, and it became the binding creed every member carried in their heart. The Order's simple purpose becomes its recurring creed: protect Voldemort's opponents. This was not an army of conquest. This was a shield wall. Dumbledore knew that Voldemort's power came from removing anyone who could stand against him. The Order of the Phoenix was the barrier. They protected witnesses. They moved Muggleborns to safety. They fought the Death Eaters in the shadows so the innocent could live in the light. They gathered intelligence. They established safe houses. They fought desperate guerrilla battles in the streets and in the countryside. Every mission, every sacrifice, was defined by that simple, desperate creed: protect Voldemort's opponents. The camera flash that captured the Order's photograph froze them in a moment before the worst of the tragedy struck. The smiling faces of Gideon and Fabian Prewett, Edgar Bones, Marlene McKinnon, they were all living embodiments of that creed. They were the front line of the resistance, and the cost was terrible. Gideon and Fabian fought like titans, taking down multiple Death Eaters before they were finally overwhelmed. Edgar Bones and his entire family were murdered in their home. Marlene McKinnon was attacked, her entire family wiped from the world in a single night. The war ground them down. It broke the Longbottoms, it orphaned Harry Potter, and it left the survivors scattered and grieving. The creed was pure, but the cost was brutally high. Yet, that purpose held. It held for those who fought and lived. It held in the hearts of those who would one day be called upon to stand again when the shadow returned. The photograph shows us they were beautiful and brave, but the real story of the Order is hidden in the weight of those specific sacrifices. It lives in the magic they wielded, the loyalty they shared, and the terrible, beautiful hope that made them willing to stand against the darkness. The creed was simple: protect Voldemort's opponents. The cost of that protection, paid by every single member of the Order of the Phoenix, from its powerful leader to its quietest contact, is their true legacy. And understanding each individual life, the specific price each was willing to pay, is the only way to truly understand what the Order of the Phoenix really was. Dumbledore gathered them in shadows, not as an army, but as a shield. The Ministry was compromised, its corridors buzzing with spies and imperious officials. To stand openly against Lord Voldemort was to invite immediate destruction. The Order of the Phoenix had to exist in the spaces between trust and terror. There were no uniforms, no ranks, and certainly no public headquarters. Unlike the Ministry's Aura Force, which followed strict protocol, the Order needed to be fluid and invisible. Dumbledore would call upon a member when their specific skills were needed, trusting them to act with discretion and silence. This lack of structure made them incredibly difficult for the Death Eaters to predict, but it also isolated them from one another. A member could go months without seeing another face from the photograph, spending every day undercover, watching from the shadows, waiting for a signal that might never come. Their work was varied and demanded an immense personal cost. Some gathered intelligence from inside the Ministry itself, feeding Dumbledore information about Voldemort's growing grip on magical society. Others were tasked with protecting specific families, those who had refused the Dark Lord's call and were marked for punishment. They monitored the movements of known Death Eaters, tracking their raids and predicting their next targets, and they searched for unlikely allies, reaching out to the giants in their northern mountains, the shunned werewolves, and the deeply suspicious goblins. They tried to build bridges where the Ministry had only burned them, but this shadow war came with a terrible price. Their greatest disadvantage was the secrecy itself, because every friend could be watched. Every friend could be cursed with the Imperious and turned into an unwitting weapon. Every friend could be coerced through threats to their family. Trust was a currency the Order could not afford to spend freely. They lived with a constant, gnawing suspicion that the person standing next to them in the midst of a raid might be the one who had sold them out. This was not paranoia, it was experience. Peter Pettigrew proved that a smile and a shared secret could hide a heart entirely corrupted by fear and ambition. The war was not just fought against Death Eaters, it was fought against the doubt that crept into every bond, every whispered conversation, every safe house that suddenly felt exposed. The Order worked by lantern light, huddled around kitchen tables, listening to crackling wireless reports of disappearances. They communicated through Patronuses, sending messages that could not be intercepted or traced. They moved through the world like ghosts themselves, avoiding the crowded places where Death Eaters held influence, meeting in the quiet, forgotten corners of the wizarding world. And so the foundation of the resistance was laid in silence and sacrifice. In the quiet, desperate years before the Dark Lord's first fall, the members of the original Order built this network of shadows. They were young, they were brave, and they were terribly vulnerable. Each of them had a face, a voice, and a story that began long before they ever heard the name of the Order of the Phoenix. That story is preserved in one of the most haunting images in the wizarding world, the old photograph of the original Order. Faces crowd together in a moment that seems almost ordinary. They smile, they lean toward one another, and for an instant, they appear to be nothing more than friends gathered at the end of a long day. But the image carries a terrible knowledge. So many of those faces would be dead within a few years. Some would be murdered in open battle. Some would be tortured into silence. Some would vanish behind the walls of Azkaban. And some would survive, only to carry the memory of everyone they had lost. There was Alastor Moody, already scarred and watchful, a man whose suspicion would become legendary. There were the Prewetts, Fabian and Gideon, brothers who fought so fiercely that it took multiple Death Eaters to bring them down. There were Dorcas Meadows, murdered personally by Voldemort, and Benji Fenwick, whose death was so violent that only fragments of him were ever found. Marlene McKinnon and her entire family were wiped out. Caradoc Dearborn disappeared without a trace. Their names became casualties in a war that often left no bodies, no answers, and no chance for farewell. Yet they did not enter the Order because they believed they were invincible. They entered because someone had to resist. Every member understood that refusing Voldemort was not a private choice. It placed parents, siblings, children, and friends in danger. It meant accepting that the next knock on the door could be a warning, an arrest, or an attack. Still, they chose to stand together, not because they were fearless, but because fear had become the weapon that ruled their world, and they refused to let it rule them completely. The previous chapter painted a picture of a war fought in shadows, a war without uniforms or public headquarters, where members gathered intelligence and monitored Death Eaters. At the center of that shadowy network stood Albus Dumbledore. The Order of the Phoenix was his creation, and its purpose was entirely shaped by his understanding of the Dark Lord. Dumbledore was never just a figurehead. He became the Order's strategist, its primary recruiter, and its moral conscience across two devastating wars. It was Dumbledore who decided who to trust, which battles to fight, and which truths to keep hidden. He recruited the werewolf and the traitor, the squib and the auror, forging them into a family bound by a single purpose. His knowledge of Voldemort's history, of the deepest arcane secrets of magic, made him utterly irreplaceable. Without him, the Order lacked direction, but that same vast knowledge created a deep and abiding loneliness. Dumbledore played his cards close to his chest, rarely revealing his full strategy to anyone. He carried the weight of prophecy and Horcrux alone. This secrecy left even his most trusted allies operating in the dark. Sirius Black resented the inactivity. Harry Potter grew frustrated with the fragments of truth. Dumbledore believed this was a necessary burden of leadership, protecting others from the terrible knowledge he carried, but it left the Order heavily dependent on the survival of a single, aging man. This reliance was made disturbingly literal by the Fidelius charm on the Order's headquarters. Dumbledore was the secret keeper for 12 Grimmauld Place. While he lived, the house was completely hidden, a sanctuary in the heart of London, but the very magic that protected it was tied to his life. When Dumbledore was killed by Severus Snape on the night of June 30th, 1997, the enchantment broke instantly. The protection became a trap. The Order had to abandon their base at the exact moment the war was escalating towards its final conflict. His death unmoored their sanctuary, turning a carefully constructed fortress into a deadly liability. The members Dumbledore gathered, the ones who survived the First War and the new ones who joined for the Second, were a deeply human collection. They were childhood friends, ruined heroes, reluctant spies, and bright young souls whose names are still remembered in the halls of Hogwarts today. The story of the Order of the Phoenix is their story, and the weight of what it meant to fight for Dumbledore's cause. For the oldest members, that cause had already demanded an unbearable price. The First Order had been born during Voldemort's original rise to power, when terror spread through Wizarding Britain and no one could be certain who had chosen the Dark Lord's side. Marlene McKinnon and her entire family were murdered. Benji Fenwick was killed so violently that only fragments of him were ever found. Edgar Bones, his wife, and their children were slaughtered in their own home. These were not distant casualties in a history book. They were friends and comrades, people whose empty places remained with those who survived. Molly and Arthur Weasley understood that danger more clearly than most. They were not legendary duelists or master spies. They were parents, raising a large family while choosing again and again to stand against a force that threatened every child in the wizarding world. Their home became a refuge, their loyalty never wavered, and Molly's fierce love made her one of the most formidable defenders the Order possessed. Remus Lupin brought a different kind of courage. Rejected by much of the society he was trying to save, he nevertheless worked to bridge the divide between wizards and werewolves. His missions were lonely and dangerous, demanding that he win the trust of creatures Voldemort hoped to use as weapons. Lupin had lost nearly everyone he loved in the First War, yet he returned to the fight because he could not accept a world ruled by fear and prejudice. Then there was Severus Snape, perhaps the Order's most difficult and dangerous ally. To almost every member, he appeared to be an embittered former Death Eater, whose loyalties could never be fully known. Dumbledore alone understood the depth of his role. Snape lived at the center of Voldemort's circle, feeding the Order information while risking exposure at every turn. His presence was a reminder that Dumbledore's war was not always clean or comfortable. It required trust where trust seemed impossible. The younger members inherited this struggle before they could truly understand its cost. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Neville, and Luna formed Dumbledore's army because they refused to remain passive while darkness gathered around them. What began as secret lessons in a hidden room became a preparation for war. By the time Hogwarts itself became a place of occupation and resistance, these students were no longer simply children protected by the Order. They had become part of its living future. And that was the Order's greatest strength. It was never merely an organization with a list of members. It was an idea passed from one generation to the next. That ordinary people could resist cruelty, that friendship could survive terror, and that no victory was worth gaining by becoming like the enemy. Dumbledore gave the Order its shape, but its members gave it its heart. Dumbledore may have been the Order's strategist, but Alastor Moody was its executioner. If the headmaster saw the war from above, piecing together prophecies and political moves, Moody lived in the dirt of it. He was a creature of the trenches. Before the Order of the Phoenix was reformed in 1995, Alastor Moody was already a ghost story whispered in the halls of the Ministry, the most accomplished Auror of a generation, a man who had single-handedly captured half the names in Azkaban. But he was not celebrated with gentle reverence. He was feared, not just by the Death Eaters, but by his own side. The scars that mapped his face, the missing chunk of his nose, the magical eye that swiveled and pierced through walls and cloaks and illusions, they all told a story of absolute, unrelenting war. When Dumbledore came to him and confirmed that Voldemort had returned, Moody did not waste time with disbelief. He had never truly stopped fighting. The peace between the wars was just a fragile truce to him, and his paranoia had kept him sharp. He walked into the drawing room of number 12, Grimmauld Place, and the mood of the room changed instantly. Alastor Moody brings an Auror's instincts, scars, and relentless suspicion to the Order. It was not just his contribution, it was his entire being. He was the living proof of what the war could do to a person, and a warning of what it demanded. He looked at the assembled faces. Some were veterans of the First War, like himself. Sirius Black, gaunt and eager. Remus Lupin, haunted and quiet. And then there were the younger ones. Tonks, with her bubblegum pink hair and her clumsy optimism. The Weasley children. Harry Potter. Moody saw them as targets, walking problems that needed solving. He had no patience for sentiment. The Death Eaters would not be sentimental. They would not hesitate. So neither could he. He teaches younger fighters that constant vigilance is not paranoia when Voldemort is hunting them. He drills this into them with a relentless, grating persistence. He makes them practice defensive spells until their wrists ache. He makes them taste Polyjuice Potion, so they know the sickening drop of trust leaving their bodies. He does not let them sleep soundly. In his mind, a moment of comfort is an invitation to disaster. He tells them stories of the First War, stories that do not make it into the history books. He tells them about the bodies the Order had to identify, the families that were erased. He uses these stories as weapons against their naivety. To Harry, Moody is a strange and difficult mentor. He saves Harry from a cursed object, but he does it with cold efficiency, not warmth. He sees Harry as a vital asset, a symbol that must be protected at all costs. There is no fatherly affection in Moody, only a desperate, grinding need to prepare the boy for the horrors ahead. Moody represents the oldest tradition of the Order, the idea that to fight a monster, you must be willing to become a little monstrous yourself. He is the figure at the edge of the campfire, the one who never sleeps, the one who stares into the dark and whispers that it is staring back. When the time comes to evacuate Harry from his aunt and uncle's house for the last time, Moody takes control. He is the architect of the escape plan. He maps every route, calculates every risk, and devises the strategy of the 7 Potters. It is a masterpiece of defensive thinking, decoys, doppelgangers, multiple paths. It is designed to confuse and overwhelm any potential attacker. It is the most secure plan the Order has ever had. But a plan is only as strong as its weakest link. Mundungus Fletcher was that link. Moody never trusted him. He kept him at arm's length. But the Order was short on bodies, and Mundungus was an asset, a known quantity in the underworld. When the Death Eaters ambush the convoy, Mundungus panics. He has a simple job: stay in formation, watch for the signal. Instead, he abandons his post. He vanishes, leaving a gap in the magical net that Moody had so carefully woven. His final mission, the escape of Harry Potter, reveals how one missing ally can doom a plan. Voldemort himself targets Moody, sensing that the old Auror is the linchpin of the operation. The killing curse strikes Moody directly. He falls from his broom, and the Order loses its guardian. Moody's body was never recovered. After the war, it was impossible to tell if he had received any kind of burial, or if he simply remained lost to the cold earth. He died as he lived, alone in the dark, fighting to the very last second. His death was a brutal education for everyone who survived that night. Mad Eye had spent months telling them to be constantly vigilant. He had shown them, through his own example, what it meant to never rest. But he could not teach them how to trust each other. He could not teach them how to cover for a comrade's weakness. That lesson was written in the turbulence of the escape, in the grief of the survivors, and in the hollow realization that one man's courage could never compensate for another's cowardice. Vigilance was not a personal shield, it was a collective contract. And the moment that contract was broken, the enemy found the gap. With Moody gone, the Order lost its warning system, the magical eye that had watched over them. The constant grumbling that had grounded them, the terrifying competence that had reassured them, was simply no longer there. The younger members had to grow up very fast. They had to become the Watchers themselves. Kingsley Shacklebolt took on more of the safety detail. Tonks became sharper, more serious. Remus Lupin began to see betrayal in every shadow, a piece of Moody that had implanted itself in his soul. Moody gave the Order a compass, even if it always pointed toward danger. He taught them that the war could not be won by wishing, or by hiding, or by hoping for the best. It had to be confronted, literally on the ground, in the skies, in every dark corner of the wizarding world. He was the most battle-hardened soldier the Order ever had, and his death was the moment the Second War truly became bloody. The cost of vigilance, he proved, was a life spent never looking away. It was a price he paid without complaint, and it was a price he demanded from everyone who fought alongside him. Alistair Moody taught the Order of the Phoenix that constant vigilance was not just a warning, but a way of life. He saw betrayal in every corner and prepared for the worst at every moment. But the Order also relied on a different kind of Auror. While Moody had become a scarred recluse, hiding from the ministry that had betrayed him, Kingsley Shacklebolt walked straight into that same ministry every day, wearing its colours and carrying its badge, while secretly serving Dumbledore's resistance. Kingsley Shacklebolt works inside the ministry, while secretly serving Dumbledore's resistance. This made him one of the most valuable assets the Order possessed. He was not just a spy. He was a filter, a guardian of information. He controlled what the Ministry knew about the Order's activities and what it remained blind to. When the Ministry sent teams to capture Sirius Black, Kingsley deliberately misdirected them, claiming Sirius was in Tibet. A false lead that bought the Order precious time. When the Ministry interrogated Harry Potter after the use of underage magic, Kingsley was there, sitting just behind Harry, lending him the silent but powerful credibility of a senior Auror. He was the one who confirmed to Cornelius Fudge that Voldemort had returned at the end of the Triwizard Tournament, when everyone else in the government was paralysed by denial or open fear. Kingsley spoke the truth with a calm that could not be ignored, even if it was not immediately believed. His quiet authority and disciplined intelligence make him one of the Order's most reliable protectors. He is a man of very few words, but his voice commands absolute attention. When the Order gathers in the dark sitting room at number 12, Grimmauld Place, Kingsley does not interrupt or argue. He listens with the patience of a true investigator, and when he finally speaks, his assessment is always precise, always trusted by Dumbledore and the others. He is the one Nymphadora Tonks confides in about her deep feelings for Remus Lupin, trusting his discretion. He is the one the Muggle Prime Minister trusts when the magical world is abruptly revealed to him in the middle of the night. In the Battle of the Seven Potters, Kingsley fights with extraordinary practiced skill, casting a silent, non-verbal Lynx Patronus to protect Harry while dodging a stream of deadly curses. He does not seek the hero's light. He does not boast of his victories. He simply holds the line, steady and unbreakable. During the darkest days of the Ministry's corruption under Dolores Umbridge, Kingsley remained in place, playing the part of the dutiful civil servant, while protecting the people the Ministry was trying to destroy. His role only grew more crucial as the war escalated. When the Ministry finally fell to Voldemort's coup, Kingsley was forced into hiding, but he never stopped fighting. He provided intelligence to the underground. He protected Muggle-borns on the run. And when the final battle came, he stood at the very front of the assault on Hogwarts. Kingsley Shacklebolt was one of the 3 wizards who duelled Lord Voldemort directly, alongside Minerva McGonagall and Horace Slughorn, a testament to his immense magical skill and courage. He survived that duel. He survived the war. After the war, the hidden operative becomes Minister for Magic and helps rebuild the world he defended. This was not a political climb driven by ambition. Kingsley had spent the entire war watching the Ministry fail time and time again. He saw Cornelius Fudge deny reality. He saw Rufus Scrimgeour sacrifice integrity for political image. He saw the Ministry fall completely to the Death Eaters under Pius Thickness. But Kingsley understood that the system itself needed to be saved, not destroyed. When the war ended, he was the natural choice. He was the only wizard who held the complete trust of both the battle-hardened Order survivors and the competent, non-corrupt members of the old Ministry. He immediately began dismantling the discriminatory laws that had been passed against Muggle-borns. He restructured the Auror office, recruiting Harry Potter and Ron Weasley to lead a new generation of law enforcement officers, men and women trained to value justice over blood status. He brought accountability, transparency, and fear back to the wizarding government. Kingsley Shacklebolt became the minister that the magical world desperately needed, a living symbol of healing, competence, and the ultimate triumph of the Order's quietest member. Kingsley Shacklebolt's journey took him from the secret meetings of the Order to the highest office in the land. He represents the victory of quiet, patient resistance over loud, corrupt power. But for every member who survived to rebuild the world, the Order also carried a long shadow of profound, personal loss. The war was not won by the Aurors and the politicians alone. It was won in the homes and the hearts of the families. It was won by the watchful mother in the burrow, by the young lovers who married, knowing the odds were stacked against them, by the parents who gave up everything to protect a child who was not their own. Kingsley fixed the machine, but the Order was always more than a machine. It was a family, and while he rose to lead, other pillars of that family were already crumbling under the unbearable weight of the war. Kingsley Shacklebolt understood patience and the power of working quietly inside the system. But the Order needed more than quiet authority. It needed people willing to stand in the open, willing to be seen, willing to make themselves targets. It needed the young and the defiant, those who had not yet learned the careful caution of survival. James Potter was the purest example of that kind of courage. He joined the original Order of the Phoenix while he was still barely out of Hogwarts. He and Lily had just started their life together, living in a small cottage in Godric's Hollow, their whole future ahead of them. Instead of building a quiet life away from the war, they threw their doors open to the resistance. James had been a leader at Hogwarts, the head boy, the star seeker, the centre of a close circle of friends. He brought that same energy to the Order, turning his home into a safe house, taking on dangerous assignments, never once questioning whether the fight was worth it. James and Lily grew into something more than just two soldiers in the Order. They became symbols. The records show that they defied Voldemort 3 separate times. We do not have the full stories of those encounters. We only know that Voldemort himself marked them for it, that he remembered their defiance when he had already forgotten so many other victims. James and Lily refused to be afraid, while other families disappeared into hiding. While the Ministry bent under the weight of infiltration, the Potters remained visible. They fought back openly. They showed the wizarding world that the Dark Lord could be challenged, that resistance was not hopeless. They became symbols of a generation that refused to submit. That defiance made Voldemort want not just their deaths, but their complete destruction. When the prophecy revealed that their infant son Harry was the one destined to oppose him, the Potters had no choice but to go into hiding. Dumbledore cast the Fidelius charm. James had to choose a secret keeper. It was the most important decision of his life. He chose Peter Pettigrew. The choice was not made from logic, it was made from loyalty. James trusted his friends completely, just as he always had. Sirius Black offered to be the secret keeper. He was the obvious choice, the best fighter, the most loyal. But James knew that everyone expected Sirius to be the secret keeper. He thought he was being clever, protecting his best friend by choosing the one no one would suspect. He trusted Peter with his family's life. Peter was already working for Voldemort. On the 31st of October, 1981, Peter Pettigrew revealed the location of the cottage. Voldemort arrived at Godric's Hollow in the dark. James was in the living room with Harry. He heard the front door splinter open. He did not stop to find his wand. He did not stop to think about the odds. He ran up the stairs to the nursery, buying time with his own body. He stood in the doorway, unarmed, facing the Dark Lord. He did not bargain. He did not plead. He simply blocked the path. Voldemort cast the killing curse. James died instantly. He fell back into the hallway, his body stopping the advance just long enough for Lily to hear, for Lily to run, for Lily to place herself between Voldemort and Harry's crib. James bought his family a handful of seconds. Those seconds were everything. Lily's love transformed those seconds into an ancient magic, a protection that Voldemort had never understood. The curse rebounded. The Dark Lord was destroyed, and Harry Potter survived with nothing but a scar. James Potter never knew that his final act had worked. He never saw his son grow up. He never knew that his defiance had sparked the chain of events that would ultimately end the war for good. But the story of the Order of the Phoenix does not end with his death. It fractures. The betrayal that killed James did not only destroy his family, it shattered the trust that held the Order together. Sirius Black was blamed. He was sent to Azkaban without a trial. Peter Pettigrew escaped into the shadows, pretending to be dead, waiting for his master to return. And the surviving members of the Order scattered, forced to rebuild their lives, in a world that had just won a war it could not fully celebrate. The scars of that night ran deeper than anyone knew. They would take more than a decade to surface, and when they did, the Order would have to be formed again, from the ground up, carrying the memory of everyone who had been lost. James and Lily defied Voldemort 3 times, symbols of a generation that refused to submit. But of the two, it was Lily who carried a magic that Voldemort could never grasp, a magic rooted not in power but in love. Lily Evans Potter entered the Order as a gifted witch, a muggle-born who had excelled at Hogwarts. She was living proof that blood status meant nothing. She was head girl, a natural leader, and an exceptional talent in charms and potions. This made her a direct contradiction to the hate Voldemort spread, and because of that, she became one of his chosen enemies. He knew her name. She was marked for death simply by existing as a threat to his ideology. But Lily did not hide from this fate. She joined the Order. She fought. She loved. She loved James. She loved her son, and she was loved, from a distance, by a man who had once called her his best friend. When the prophecy was made, foretelling the birth of a boy who could defeat the Dark Lord, Severus Snape overheard it. He carried the news to Voldemort, believing he was serving his master. But when he realized that the prophecy marked Lily's son for death, he was consumed with regret. He begged Voldemort to spare her, and Voldemort, seeing an opportunity to reward a loyal servant, agreed to give her a chance. He would allow her to live. On Halloween night, the Dark Lord arrived in Godric's Hollow. James tried to hold him off, but he fell quickly, and then Voldemort turned to Lily. He offered her the chance to step aside, to save herself. It was a choice that most would have taken, a chance to live, but Lily did not move. She refused to abandon Harry. She wrapped her arms around him and stood between him and the killing curse. She made a choice that Voldemort could not understand. She chose to die for her son, and in that choice, she created the protection that Voldemort never understood. She unlocked an ancient magic, a magic that fed on sacrifice. The curse struck her, and it rebounded. It destroyed Voldemort's body, ending the First War in a single stroke. But the magic did not end there. It lived in Harry's blood. It became a shield that the Dark Lord could not cross. For 16 years it protected Harry. It turned him into a weapon against Voldemort himself. When Voldemort took Harry's blood for his resurrection, he unknowingly tethered himself to that same protection. He made it impossible for him to kill Harry without destroying himself. This was the legacy of Lily's life and death. She did not just save her son in that moment. She changed the entire architecture of the war. She created a trap that Voldemort walked into with his eyes wide open. He never understood love. He could not fathom why someone would die for another, and because he could not understand it, he could not defeat it. The impact of that Halloween night rippled through both wars. It gave the Order its greatest victory and its deepest wound. The Potters were gone. The First War was over, but the silence was uneasy. The Longbottoms were still suffering, their bodies and minds broken by the Lestranges. The Bones family had lost their patriarch. The Prewett twins had fallen in battle. The McKinnon family was completely wiped out. The Order was scattered, many of its members shattered by the years of fighting. But the love that Lily had poured into the world did not fade. It waited, dormant, until the day the Dark Lord returned, and when he did, it was ready for him. The story of the Order of the Phoenix is a story of sacrifice, but of all the sacrifices made, none were more powerful than the one made by Lily Potter. Her love did not just protect her son, it defined the entire conflict. It reminded every witch and wizard who chose to resist that courage was not the absence of fear, it was the decision to stand in front of it. Even when the cost was everything, Lily's final act became the foundation of Harry's survival, but it also became the moral answer to Voldemort's entire reign. He sought immortality through murder. She achieved something greater through love. Her body was lost, but her choice endured in Harry, in the people who protected him, and in the final victory that Voldemort could never prevent. The love Lily Potter left behind was a shield that Voldemort could not penetrate, but it was born from a catastrophic failure of trust. The Potters were hunted because someone they considered family turned traitor, but the man who orchestrated the decoy plan, the one who should have been their secret keeper, shared a bond with them deeper than most blood relations. To understand the betrayal, you have to understand the man who loved them like his own soul. Sirius Black, a member of the noble and most ancient House of Black, a family that prized blood purity and worshipped the dark arts. His own mother produced propaganda that celebrated the burning of Muggle-borns from the wizarding world. Sirius rejected every single tenet of his upbringing. He did not want the allegiance his family craved with the Dark Lord. He rejected their blood purity and their obsession with power. At 16, he ran away from the house on Grimmauld Place and found a true home with the Potters. James's parents took him in without hesitation. Sirius became a brother to James. They were inseparable. When the original Order of the Phoenix formed to face the terror of the First War, Sirius Black joined immediately. He fought alongside Lily and James. He was the godfather to their infant son, Harry. Sirius Black rejects his pure blood family's allegiance to Voldemort and joins James's side. When Voldemort specifically targeted the Potters, the Fidelius charm became their only hope. James instinctively chose Sirius as his secret keeper, but Sirius, brilliant and arrogant, proposed a decoy. He insisted they switch to Peter Pettigrew. He believed he was too obvious a target and that Peter would be overlooked. It was the worst strategic decision in the history of the Order. Peter revealed their location to Voldemort. James and Lily were murdered. Sirius tracked Peter down to a street full of Muggles. Peter screamed his betrayal to the world, cut off his own finger, and vanished into the sewer. He framed Sirius for the explosion and the murders. Sirius was arrested by Aurors without a trial. He was framed as a traitor after the Potters' deaths and loses 12 years to Azkaban. The Dementors could not destroy him because his innocence was a shield. More than that, Sirius was an illegal animagus. He had transformed into a dog so many times that the prison itself could not dull his mind entirely. He survived on the knowledge of his own truth. When he saw Peter Pettigrew on the front page of the Daily Prophet, disguised as the Weasley family rat, he escaped. He swam across the North Sea. He tracked Harry down. He finally got a chance to explain. Freed too late, he offers Harry family and refuge. He moves into Grimmauld Place, the house he swore he would never return to, and dedicates himself to Harry's protection. He becomes a core member of the reconstituted Order, but he is a caged dog. He cannot leave the house without risking his soul to the Ministry. He is restless. He is desperate to prove his worth. When Harry is lured to the Department of Mysteries, Sirius does not hesitate. He believes the visions. He rushes to the Ministry with the remaining members of the Order. He charges into the battle against the Death Eaters. He fights his own cousin, Bellatrix Lestrange. He taunts her. He dodges her curses, but he is laughing. He is having fun, and that moment of hubris costs him everything. Bellatrix fires a jet of red light directly at his chest. Sirius falls backward through the ancient stone archway in the Death Chamber. He is gone. He is taken behind the veil. Sirius Black was the Godfather in exile his entire life, exiled from his family, exiled from his freedom, exiled from his best friend, and finally exiled from life itself. His death cuts through the Order like a blade. It proves that no one is safe. It leaves Harry completely alone, and it leaves the quietest of the original Marauders to carry the burden of the war without his anchor. Werewolves had no place in the pure blood world, but one of them had found a home among the Marauders. That friendship was the only thing that kept him human. Now the last of his brothers was gone. Remus Lupin had to face the Second War without James, without Lily, and without Sirius. He had to fight for a world that had already taken everything he loved. Sirius Black stepped back into a world that was nothing like the one he had left behind. The war had changed, and the brotherhood of the Marauders had been shattered beyond repair. But one man understood that particular grief better than anyone. The friend Sirius had lost touch with during those long years of isolation. Remus Lupin. Remus Lupin was the quiet tragedy at the heart of the original Order of the Phoenix. He joined the fight, knowing the world he was defending had, since he was a small boy, treated him as something dangerous and disposable. It was a cruel irony. He was giving his life for a society that would have happily locked him away if they knew the full truth. When he was 4 years old, his father insulted Fenrir Greyback, and Greyback took his revenge in the most brutal way imaginable. He attacked Remus in the night. The bite turned him into a werewolf, a fate considered worse than death by most of the wizarding world. His parents spent a fortune searching for a cure that did not exist. From that moment, he was a secret that had to be guarded at all costs. Albus Dumbledore gave him a chance when no one else would. He allowed Remus to attend Hogwarts, providing the Shrieking Shack as a place to transform in safety. It was there, in that ancient castle, that he made his first true friends. James Potter, Sirius Black, and Peter Pettigrew discovered his condition and, instead of recoiling, became animagi just so they could keep him company during the full moon. It was the greatest gift he had ever known. For a few brief golden years, he was not a monster. He was a marauder. He belonged. And then the First War destroyed everything. Remus fought alongside his friends. He watched James and Lily fall in love. He saw Harry born. He believed in the cause with his entire heart. But the war took James. It took Lily. It sent Sirius to Azkaban. And it revealed Peter as the worst kind of traitor. The marauders were gone. Remus was left completely alone, carrying the secret of his lycanthropy, like a chain that dragged him beneath the surface of a world he could never fully rejoin. For 12 years he drifted. He lived in the margins of wizarding society, a brilliant man reduced to poverty because no one would hire a werewolf. This is the context for everything that followed. Remus Lupin fights for a world that has spent his life treating him as dangerous and disposable. When Voldemort returned in the summer of 1995, Dumbledore did not hesitate. He sought out Remus Lupin and asked him to join the reconstituted Order. Dumbledore's trust gives him a place in the Order where he uses his condition to reach werewolf communities. It was a desperate and dangerous mission. Voldemort was actively recruiting the werewolf packs, promising them revenge against the wizards who had cast them out. Fenrir Greyback was his most vicious recruiter, turning entire packs into Death Eater sympathizers. Dumbledore's plan was to send Remus into those very communities. To convince them, the Order offered a better future. It was a mission that failed more often than it succeeded. The werewolves he approached distrusted him. They saw him as a tame wolf, a wizard in monster's clothing who had betrayed his own kind. They rejected him, and the wizards he returned to looked at him with the same old suspicion. He was an outsider to both sides, a double agent without a home, fighting a war for people who would not shake his hand. But he kept trying. He did it not because the world deserved his sacrifice, but because Dumbledore had shown him trust when he had nothing else. If Dumbledore believed Remus could be a hero, then Remus would try to be one, no matter the cost. Throughout the Second War, Remus proved himself over and over. He was there when Sirius fell through the veil in the Department of Mysteries. He taught at Hogwarts briefly and was forced to resign when his secret was exposed. The world kept rejecting him, and he kept offering his life for it anyway. Then something unexpected happened. Nymphadora Tonks, a young Auror with a spirit as bright as her ever-changing hair, fell in love with him. It baffled Remus. He tried to push her away. He told her he was too old, too broken, too dangerous. He told her he was a werewolf, and she simply did not care. It was the hardest thing Remus had ever done, accepting that he was worthy of being loved. His long search for belonging ends beside Tonks at the Battle of Hogwarts. They married, they had a son named Teddy, and for a brief shining window, Remus Lupin had a family of his own. He had everything he thought he could never have. But the war was not over. The final stand was approaching. Remus and Tonks kissed their newborn son goodbye and went to fight. It was the last act of a man who had spent his entire life giving everything to a cause that had barely acknowledged his humanity. At the Battle of Hogwarts, Remus fought ferociously. He duelled with a skill born of years of surviving things no wizard should have to survive. He fell in the chaos. Tonks fell nearby, searching for him. They died together, side by side, two Order members who had found each other in the wreckage of the war. Remus Lupin's life is a painful truth laid bare. He fought for a world that saw him as a monster, and he gave that world his everything. He used his deepest shame as a weapon for the Order's cause. Of all the members of the Order of the Phoenix, Remus Lupin had the least reason to trust wizarding society, and he gave it the most. He was the werewolf among friends, and in those final moments at Hogwarts, fighting beside his wife, he was finally surrounded by the belonging he had always been denied. Tonks herself had defied her family's dark legacy long before Voldemort's return. As a metamorph magus and the daughter of a disowned pureblood witch, her very existence was a rebellion. Her journey alongside Remus proved that the generation born into war was ready to make their own choices, and among those choices was the decision to stand against the darkness, no matter what it cost them. While Remus Lupin moved through the uncertain world of the werewolves, carrying out Dumbledore's most difficult mission, the Order was already bleeding from a wound that had been inflicted years before. That wound was Peter Pettigrew. Peter Pettigrew appears in the old photograph as one more member of James Potter's closest circle. He stands beside Sirius, slightly apart, his face unremarkable, his posture uncertain. He was a marauder, an animagus and a friend, but he was never a brave man. The war against Voldemort was a test of character. Peter Pettigrew failed that test completely. He felt the darkness closing in, and he was terrified. Fear drives him to Voldemort. He abandoned his friends and went to the Death Eaters, offering them information in exchange for his own safety. He became a spy inside the Order, a hidden blade aimed at the heart of the Resistance. When the Potters went into hiding, the Order devised a plan. Sirius Black would be the public decoy, the obvious choice for secret keeper. The true keeper would be Peter Pettigrew. It was a strategy built on trust, but Peter had already shattered that trust. His betrayal hands over the Potter's location. He went to Voldemort and told him everything. James and Lily Potter died because their friend chose fear over loyalty. In the aftermath, Peter did not stand and face the consequences. He framed Sirius for his own murder, faked his death in an explosion of magic and rubble, and vanished. His years disguised as Ron Weasley's rat proved that the Order's worst wound came from within. He lived as Scabbers, hidden in the home of the Weasley family. He slept in their beds, ate at their table, and listened to their secrets. For 12 years, the man who destroyed the Potters lived in the heart of another Order family, completely undetected. He was a ghost hiding in plain sight, a reminder that the enemy was not always on the other side of the battlefield. When Sirius Black escaped Azkaban and cornered him, Peter did what he always did. He begged, he wept, he blamed his weakness. Harry Potter, the boy he had orphaned, spared his life. It was a moment of profound grace, and Peter answered it by running away. He returned to Voldemort, completed the ritual that gave the Dark Lord a new body, and murdered Cedric Diggory. He served his master without question, a trembling servant waiting for orders. In his final moment, Peter Pettigrew showed the faintest flicker of the person he might have been. He hesitated when Harry reminded him of the debt he owed, but it was too late. The silver hand Voldemort had given him recognized the hesitation as betrayal. It turned on Peter and strangled him. The friend who betrayed them was destroyed by his own failure to be anything other than a servant. Peter Pettigrew was not a Death Eater by conviction. He was a coward who chose the safest path again and again. His betrayal is the Order's most intimate wound, the one that proves trust can be a weapon. The war took many others in those early years. Frank and Alice Longbottom, talented Aurors and loyal Order members, were captured and tortured into madness. They never recovered. Their son, Neville, grew up in their shadow, carrying the weight of their sacrifice, without ever truly knowing them. The Order was a family of martyrs, and Peter Pettigrew was the knife that cut the deepest. Marlene McKinnon and her entire family were wiped out by Death Eaters. Edgar Bones was killed along with his wife and children. Gideon and Fabian Prewett fought bravely against overwhelming odds before they were murdered. Their names became part of the terrible roll call of the First War, proof that membership in the Order was never simply a matter of attending meetings or passing messages. It meant accepting that a knock on the door could be the end. By the time Voldemort fell at Godric's Hollow, the Order had survived, but it had not escaped unchanged. Too many chairs were empty. Too many families had been broken apart. Some members were dead. Some were imprisoned. Some had lost their minds, and others carried grief that would shape every decision they made in the years ahead. Voldemort's defeat gave the Wizarding world a reason to celebrate, but those who had fought him understood that victory had come at an unbearable cost. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, that like button to help more people discover this story. Peter Pettigrew broke under the weight of his own fear. He chose the easy path, the path of survival, and it cost him everything. But the Order was built on people who broke. It was built on people who bent, but never shattered. None embody this more fully than Frank and Alice Longbottom. They were Aurors. Top Aurors, the very best of a generation, trained to hunt the darkest wizards. They fought Voldemort directly, alongside James and Lily Potter, alongside Mad-Eye Moody. They defied him 3 times, earning a spot on his personal kill list. They were members of the original Order, from almost the very beginning soldiers on the front line, who never once considered retreat. They had a son, Neville, born just a few days before Harry Potter. While James and Lily went into hiding with their child, Frank and Alice continued to stand in the open. They fought for Neville's future with their wands drawn, believing in a world they could win outright, rather than one they could merely survive inside. When Voldemort fell on that Halloween night in 1981, the war took a strange turn. The Dark Lord was gone, but his followers were scattered, desperate, and vicious. Bellatrix Lestrange refused to accept her master's defeat. She was fanatical, she was brilliant, and she was utterly without mercy. She gathered her husband Rodolphus, his brother Rabastan, and the young Barty Crouch Jr. They were hunting. They wanted information. They wanted to know if their master could return, and they wanted revenge on those who had thwarted him. They found Frank and Alice Longbottom in their own home. The torture took place in the rooms where their families should have been safe. Bellatrix used the Cruciatus Curse, a spell whose entire purpose is pain, so intense it can permanently shatter the human mind. She pushed and pushed. She demanded to know what they had seen, what they had done, where Voldemort had gone. Frank and Alice never gave up a single name. They gave nothing. Their wills were unmovable, but the curse broke them anyway. Their minds retreated into a place where no torturer could reach them, leaving their bodies behind as empty shells. They survived, but the permanent magical damage was absolute. They were moved to the Janus Thicky ward at St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries. They lived, but they were no longer present in the world. Their son Neville was raised by his grandmother, Augusta, in the shadow of a legacy he could not escape. He was told he had to live up to their reputation. Every visit to St. Mungo's was a quiet reminder of what he was meant to be, the weight of a story he had never chosen. He inherited their wand, a hand-me-down of expectation. He faced the same Dark Lord who had ruined them, struggling with the same shadow of prophecy that hung over Harry Potter. But in the end, Neville Longbottom did what Frank and Alice had been fighting for all along. He stood his ground at the Battle of Hogwarts. He pulled the sword of Gryffindor from the sorting hat in front of a gathered crowd and destroyed Voldemort's final Horcrux, the snake Nagini. He finished their violent, interrupted story. He inherited their broken struggle and made it whole again. He proved that the Longbottoms were never truly broken. They were simply waiting for their son to arrive and carry the torch forward. The Longbottoms represent the core of the original order, a willingness to suffer without surrendering the cause. Their names echo alongside the other great tragedies of that war: the Prewetts, the McKinnons, the Bones. All of them families who gave their lives to a fight that seemed impossible. They were the ones who held the line so that a new generation could finally break through. And among those names, the Prewetts stand as a reminder that Voldemort's war did not spare entire families. Fabian and Gideon Prewett fought together until the end. It took 5 Death Eaters to bring them down. Even then, the attackers did not escape unscathed. Their deaths were not quiet, and they were not meaningless. Molly Weasley carried the memory of her brothers for the rest of her life, raising her own children in a world still threatened by the evil. Fabian and Gideon had died resisting. Frank and Alice Longbottom were broken but not killed. Their survival became a different kind of tragedy, a permanent reminder of what the Death Eaters were willing to do to extract information. But not everyone in that old photograph was given even that much. Some of the faces captured in the frame were among the first to fall, their names carved into the earliest casualty lists of the First Wizarding War. Among them was Edgar Bones. Edgar Bones had been a prominent figure in the Order, a wizard of considerable skill and reputation. When the Death Eaters came for him, they did not stop with Edgar alone. His wife and children were murdered alongside him. Their home turned into a scene of mass slaughter. The attack was not just about eliminating a single opponent. It was a statement. The Death Eaters punished entire bloodlines, erasing families to send a message that no one was safe, that loyalty to the Order could cost everything you loved. Edgar Bones was gone, and so was the future his family might have had. The same ruthless logic claimed Marlene McKinnon. She appears in the photograph as a young woman, her whole life ahead of her. But the Death Eaters did not leave her a future. Her entire family was wiped out in a single attack. The Order discovered their bodies afterward, the McKinnon name reduced to a memory. Marlene's face in that photograph is one more without a story beyond the war. She existed only as a casualty, a name on a list, a loss that echoed through the ranks of the Order. And then there was Dorcas Meadows. We know little about her life, but we know how she died. She was reportedly killed by Voldemort himself. That detail alone measures how seriously he took her threat. Voldemort did not often dirty his own hands with Order members. He sent his followers to do the killing, but Dorcas Meadows warranted his personal attention. She must have been formidable, a witch whose skill or bravery made her a target the Dark Lord could not trust to anyone else. Her death was a confirmation that the Order had members dangerous enough to draw Voldemort into the field. These 3 names are among the first to be crossed out in the photograph: Edgar Bones, Marlene McKinnon, Dorcas Meadows. Each one represents a different kind of loss: a family destroyed, a bloodline ended, a direct execution by the most feared wizard in the world. The photograph holds more such stories, more faces that would never grow old, more lives cut short before the war even reached its peak. The Prewett brothers, Gideon and Fabian, were another pair marked for death. Their fate would be just as brutal and just as final. Gideon and Fabian Prewett were not taken easily. They fought together against 5 Death Eaters, holding their ground against impossible odds. Their deaths became a measure of both their courage and the overwhelming force could unleash against even the most capable members of the Order. Mad-Eye Moody later spoke of them with a kind of respect reserved for warriors who had made their enemies pay dearly. But courage did not save them. The brothers were killed, leaving behind only the knowledge that they had faced terror without surrendering to it. Their loss was especially painful because it showed how the war could consume whole branches of a family at once. Molly Weasley had already lost her brothers before the Second War began. By the time Harry entered the wizarding world, Gideon and Fabian were remembered through fragments. a watch given to Harry, old stories, and the grief that never fully left those who loved them. Like Edgar Bones and Marlene McKinnon, the Prewetts proved that the Death Eaters did not see relatives as separate people. They saw them as targets connected by blood, loyalty, and vulnerability. Benji Fenwick suffered one of the most disturbing fates of all. There was so little left of him that he had to be identified by what remained. His death was not a clean duel or a heroic final stand remembered in detail. It was annihilation. The violence done to Benji reduced a person to fragments, as though the war itself had tried to erase every trace that he had ever existed. Yet even that could not entirely erase him. His name remained in the Order's history, another reminder that survival was never guaranteed, even for those standing beside Dumbledore. Caradoc Dearborn met a different end. He did not become a confirmed body on a battlefield. He vanished. 6 months after the photograph was taken, he disappeared without explanation, and he was never found. In some ways, that uncertainty was its own cruelty. There was no grave, no final account, no certainty for those who waited for him. The war created absences as much as it created deaths. People left home for missions and did not return. Friends searched for answers that never came. Families were forced to live between hope and despair, unable to mourn properly because they could not prove what had happened. That was the reality behind the smiling faces in the photograph. It was not simply a picture of brave volunteers gathered for a cause. It was a record of people standing at the edge of disaster, without knowing who would be alive by the end of it. Some would be murdered. Some would be tortured beyond recovery. Some would disappear. Some would be forced into hiding. And some would carry the burden of surviving when so many beside them did not. The First Order of the Phoenix was never a large army. It was a small group trying to resist a movement that had spread fear through every part of wizarding society. They could not always trust the Ministry. They could not always trust their neighbours. And as the war grew darker, they could not always trust one another. Voldemort's greatest weapon was not merely magical power. It was fear, suspicion, and the knowledge that anyone might be secretly serving him. That is why the losses in the photograph matter so much. Every crossed-out face weakened the Order, but every death also revealed the cost of resistance. These witches and wizards had chosen to fight when silence would have been safer. They knew what Voldemort was capable of, and they stood against him anyway. The story of the Bones family and the McKinnon family established a grim pattern in the First War against Voldemort. The Death Eaters did not just target their enemies. They tore through entire family trees, leaving bodies behind as messages. But some losses were different. Some left a silence where a body should have been, or a horror where a face should have been. The original photograph of the Order of the Phoenix holds two names that represent this very specific kind of tragedy. Caradoc Dearborn disappears so completely that his body is never recovered. He is not killed in a duel with witnesses. He does not fall in a known battle. He simply vanishes from the world, leaving no trace for the Order to find. In a war fought in shadows and secret locations, Dearborn's disappearance represents the deepest kind of loss. His family was left with nothing but a name on a list of the fallen. No closure, no ceremony, just the gap where a person used to be. Benji Fenwick's fate was the opposite of Dearborn's in one terrible way. Benji Fenwick is found only in fragments after being murdered by Death Eaters. Where Dearborn left nothing, Fenwick left too much, and in the worst possible condition. The fragments of what the Order recovered communicated the level of violence the enemy was capable of. The Order did not need to be told what the Death Eaters were willing to do. They saw it directly. These losses reveal the original war's particular horror. Families often receive neither answers nor remains. The Longbottoms were broken but alive. The Potters were dead but found. Dearborn and Fenwick occupy a darker space in the memory of the Order. Dearborn's family had to live with an open door to a room that would never be filled. Fenwick's family had to bury and destroy what came home. The psychological warfare of the Death Eaters relied on this uncertainty. Not knowing what happened to someone can be just as devastating as knowing the worst. The original Order photograph captures a moment before many of these fates were sealed. The people standing in it, unaware of what the war would demand of them, represent a kind of hope that the First War eventually burned away. For everyone who vanished or was torn apart, there were others who survived with the scars of that memory. The survivors of the original Order carried these stories into a world that preferred not to remember. They had buried friends. They had waited for news that never came. And when the Second War began, they understood exactly what was at stake. For the fallen, the war was over. For the living, the memory of what happened to Caradoc Dearborn and Benji Fenwick was a reminder of the cost of fighting and the cost of looking away. That is why the names in the photograph matter so much. They are not simply background figures standing behind Dumbledore and Moody. Each name represents a life that intersected with a larger catastrophe. And each absence tells us something about the war that official celebrations could not capture. Voldemort's first defeat did not restore what had been taken. It only ended the immediate terror. The families of the dead still had empty chairs at their tables. The survivors still woke, expecting the next attack. And the children who grew up after the war inherited stories filled with names they had never met. For people like Alastor Moody, the losses became part of the reason he never relaxed. His suspicion was not an eccentricity created in a vacuum. It was the result of watching friends disappear, watching trusted people die, and learning that even victory could not guarantee safety. For Remus Lupin, the photograph was a record of another kind of isolation. Many of the people who had fought beside him were gone before he had the chance to build a stable life after the war. For Sirius Black, the destruction of the Order was made even crueler by his own imprisonment. While others mourned the dead, Sirius was locked away and blamed for a betrayal he had not committed. The First Order of the Phoenix was not defeated in one single battle. It was worn down through assassination, betrayal, torture, disappearance, and fear. Every loss made the remaining members more vulnerable. Every family destroyed sent a warning to the next family considering resistance. That was the true strategy behind the Death Eaters' brutality. They wanted courage to feel pointless. They wanted people to believe that choosing the right side would only bring suffering to everyone they loved. Yet the Order's dead also became proof that resistance had existed. Their names survived because someone remembered them. The photograph survived because it showed that before the darkness closed in, there had been a group willing to stand together. They were flawed, frightened, and divided by their own secrets, but they chose to fight when many others could not or would not. That choice did not save all of them. It did not protect their families from grief, but it helped create the foundation that Voldemort could never fully destroy. When the Order rose again, it did so in the shadow of these losses. The second generation did not begin with a clean slate. They inherited unfinished mourning, old trauma, and the knowledge that war always asks for more than anyone is prepared to give. Caradoc Dearborn and Benji Fenwick were not famous in the way Harry Potter became famous. They did not receive monuments described in detail or victories sung about in public, but their fates reveal the human cost hidden behind the legend of Voldemort's fall. They remind us that every war has people whose endings are never made whole, and whose loved ones must carry the pieces forward, even as the Order mourned the loss of Caradoc Dearborn, who vanished without a trace, and Benji Fenwick, who was found only in gruesome fragments. There were others who faced the growing darkness with unwavering resolve. Gideon and Fabian Prewett were among those who refused to back down, even as the danger around them escalated to terrifying heights. Gideon and Fabian Prewett stand with the Order despite the escalating danger around them. They were brothers, and they were Molly Weasley's siblings, though that is not always the first thing remembered about them. What is remembered? Their bravery and their skill in battle. In fact, 5 Death Eaters are said to be needed to bring the brothers down. That detail comes from Sirius Black himself, who recounted their deaths to Harry Potter years later. He said they fought like heroes, and that it took 5 Death Eaters to kill them. Such a statement speaks volumes about their abilities and the threat they pose to Voldemort's followers. But for Molly Weasley, the loss of Gideon and Fabian was not just a statistic of war. Their deaths become personal history for Molly Weasley, whose family will later shelter the revived Order. When the Order reforms in 1995, the Burrow becomes a safe house and headquarters of sorts, and Molly's fierce protectiveness over her children and the young fighters can be traced back to the pain of losing her brothers. She knows too well what this war costs. The Prewett brothers were laid to rest, but their memory lived on in the Order. They were among the many who gave everything in the First War, and as Voldemort regained power, the names of those who fell before served as reminders of what was at stake. In that old photograph of the original Order, their faces are there, side by side, alongside others who carried their own burdens and faced their own choices, each one a thread in a tapestry woven with courage, loss, and the determination to resist. Among those faces were Marlene McKinnon and her family, whose fate revealed just how merciless Voldemort's followers had become. Marlene was not merely killed in battle. Her entire family was wiped out, a punishment designed to leave no comfort behind for those who chose to resist. Sirius remembered her as one of the casualties of the First War, another friend lost before she had the chance to see the world. Voldemort was trying to build defeated. Then there was Dorcas Meadows, a witch whose name carried particular weight even among the Order's fallen. She was said to have been killed by Voldemort himself. That distinction was not a mark of weakness. It suggested the opposite. Voldemort did not personally hunt those he considered insignificant. Dorcas must have been formidable enough, dangerous enough, or defiant enough to draw his direct attention. Her death became another warning of the terrible cost faced by anyone willing to stand openly against him. Edgar Bones also stood with the Order, supported by a family known for its integrity and strength. His death was followed by the murder of his wife and children, an atrocity that left only his niece, Susan Bones, to carry the family name into the next generation. Edgar's sister, Amelia Bones, would later become a powerful figure in the Ministry of Magic, and the Bones family remained a symbol of courage even after suffering such devastating losses. The pattern was unmistakable. Voldemort and the Death Eaters did not only target fighters, they targeted parents, siblings, children, and anyone who might offer shelter, loyalty, or hope. Fear was one of their greatest weapons. If an entire family could be destroyed for the actions of one person, then silence might seem safer than resistance. That was the world the Order was fighting against. Yet the Order continued to grow, drawing in witches and wizards, who understood that safety purchased through surrender was never truly safety at all. Some were experienced fighters, some worked within the ministry, some provided intelligence, safe places to hide, or quiet support when open defiance was too dangerous. Their contributions were not always recorded in detail, but each carried the same risk. The original Order of the Phoenix was not an army with uniforms or a public chain of command. It was a network built on trust, at a time when trust could be fatal. Death Eaters hid behind masks, but many also hid behind respectable names, ministry positions, and ordinary lives. Nobody could be entirely certain who was loyal, who was frightened, or who might betray them. That uncertainty would eventually lead to one of the darkest betrayals in the war. But before that final disaster, the Order fought on through loss after loss, believing that Voldemort could be stopped. They had no guarantee that they would survive. Many of them did not. Still, their resistance prevented the darkness from becoming absolute, and their sacrifices helped create the fragile chance that a child named Harry Potter would one day live. The 5 Death Eaters needed to bring down Gideon and Fabian Prewett tell us something about the kind of courage the Order needed. It was not always the courage of the direct fight. Sometimes it was the courage to watch, to wait, to serve in simple ways that looked nothing like magic at all. The Prewetts fell swinging, but their sacrifice was not the only kind the war demanded. It was also fought in shadows, in silences, and in the loyalty of those who never raised a wand in anger. Rubeus Hagrid was one of those soldiers. He does not fit the image of a quiet operative. He is half giant, loud and prone to emotional outbursts. But Hagrid served Albus Dumbledore with an unusual loyalty, a devotion so deep that it looked less like duty and more like faith. He was the one Dumbledore trusted to retrieve Harry Potter from the ruins of Godric's Hollow. Hagrid carried the infant boy across the country on a flying motorbike and placed him on the doorstep of number 4, Prewett Drive. That single act tied him to Harry for life. In the years that followed, Hagrid remained one of Dumbledore's most reliable agents, even if the tasks he was given did not always look like espionage. When the Order was reconstituted in 1995, Dumbledore gave Hagrid some of the most dangerous diplomatic missions of the Second Wizarding War. He was sent to negotiate with the Giants deep in the mountains of Europe. It was a mission that nearly killed him. He returned thin, bruised and scarred, but he returned. He had endured scorn, violence, and the stark truth that the Giants had already sided with Voldemort. Still, Hagrid never refused an order from Dumbledore. He went because he was asked. That quiet, absolute loyalty is one of the defining traits of Rubeus Hagrid, even if it is easy to overlook him as merely the gamekeeper or the professor of care of magical creatures. There is another figure whose name does not appear in the heroic stories of the Order. Arabella Figg lived just down the road from the Dursleys. She was a squib, born into a wizarding family, but unable to perform magic herself. To the muggles of Prewett Drive, she was simply the old cat lady who smelled of cabbage. But under that ordinary surface, Arabella Figg was watching. Dumbledore had placed her there before Harry ever arrived. From the least magical place imaginable, a suburban street in Surrey, she kept an eye on the boy who lived. She never cast a spell. She never needed to. Her purpose was simple: to be present, to report if anything went wrong, to document Harry's childhood from a distance. When Harry had to testify before the Wizengamot in 1995, she was the one who could confirm the Dementor attack on him. She admitted under oath that she had lied about her life and that she had been watching him for years. It was a quiet, lonely form of membership in the Order. She had no magic and no wand, but she had eyes, and Dumbledore trusted those eyes. Elphius, Doge and Daedalus Diggle also belong to this quieter kind of courage. They are not Aurors. They are not warriors. They are loyal friends who kept showing up. Elphius Doge had known Dumbledore since they were boys. When they met at Hogwarts, he was by all accounts a grateful friend, one who wrote the eulogies and defended the memory of his old companion against slanders like those published by Rita Skeeter. He was not a fighter, but he was a witness. Doge appears in the margins of the Order's story, always present, always loyal, even if he never led a charge. Daedalus Diggle is entirely different in personality, but similar in purpose. He is the eccentric wizard who bowed to Harry in a muggle shop, the one who could not resist lighting street lamps as fireworks went off in celebration. He is laughable to some, even annoying, but he is also the one who helped move the Dursleys into hiding near the end of the war. He struck a deal to keep them safe, not because he liked them, but because he was asked. Diggle and Doge do not get monuments. They do not have dramatic deaths on the battlefield. But the Order could not have functioned without steady, faithful members who simply kept showing up, year after year, in a war measured by casualties and dark marks in the sky. It is easy to forget that the Order was also held together by people who simply refused to stop being friends. Together, Hagrid, Figg, Doge and Diggle form a different picture of the Order of the Phoenix. It is easy to remember the warriors, the Potters, the Longbottoms, the Prewetts, but the war was also sustained by those who carried messages, who watched from windows, who negotiated with hostile giants because Dumbledore asked them to. The Quiet Watchers faced their own form of danger. They were not immune to torture or death, They simply operated in a quieter register. Their courage is just as real. It is the courage to stay in place, to remain unnoticed, to serve without glory. But the quiet watchers could only see the storm coming from a distance. When the storm finally broke, the Order needed those who could stand directly in its path. It called upon the Aurors, who had spent their careers hunting dark wizards. It called upon the strategists, who could turn intelligence into action. Their stories bring us closer to the heart of the conflict, where the war was no longer fought in silences, but in open battle. But there was one more quiet watcher in this story. A man who watched from behind the bar of the Hog's Head Inn. A man who shared the name Dumbledore, but very little of his brother's faith in grand plans. While Hagrid carried out Albus's most dangerous missions, and Arabella Figg kept watch over Harry from a distance, Aberforth Dumbledore chose a different kind of service. It was a service grounded in the soil of what he could actually see, protect, and hold. Aberforth Dumbledore supported the resistance against Lord Voldemort, but he never shared his brother's faith in prophecies or destiny. He had seen what that faith could cost. The death of his sister Ariana, a tragedy born from the wreckage of Albus's ambitions with Grindelwald, had taught him that grand schemes often left the innocent shattered in their wake. Aberforth knew that hope was not something the universe granted. It was something you had to shelter with your own hands. And yet, for all his distance from the inner circle of the Order, Aberforth quietly made his pub available to the cause. The Hog's Head became a gathering place for everyone who needed to move unnoticed. Rumours collected in the dark corners of its taproom. Mundungus Fletcher sold his stolen goods at its scarred tables. When Harry Potter needed a venue to hold the very first meeting of Dumbledore's army, the Hog's Head was the only neutral ground in Hogsmeade, where desperate students and rebels could find one another, without the Ministry catching wind of their plans. Aberforth allowed it, not because he believed the war would be won with a single lesson or a secret army, but because he understood that the smallest acts of defiance were the only things that kept the dark from closing in completely. This was the core of Aberforth's character in the war. His loyalty was never enthusiastic. It was never draped in the bright fabric of hope or prophecy. It was a stubborn, heavy duty. He would not fight for the grand narrative, but he would fight for the children hiding in the castle. He would fight for the refugees passing through his door. As the war deepened and Voldemort's grip tightened, Aberforth proved that reluctant loyalty can still become decisive bravery. When Hogwarts fell under the control of the Carrows, he became the lifeblood of the resistance inside the castle. He communicated with Neville Longbottom through the silver form of his goat Patronus, passing information and coordinating the rebellion. The tunnel hidden behind the portrait of Ariana Dumbledore became a secret route for those who needed to escape or return, a testament to how Aberforth had channeled his family's deepest pain into a path of survival. And when the final battle came to Hogwarts, when the walls of the ancient school shook with the violence of the assault, Aberforth did not turn away. He stood with the defenders in the Great Hall. His was not the bravery of someone who believed in a guaranteed victory. It was the bravery of a man who knew that even if the fight was hopeless, refusing to fight was worse. He took up his wand alongside the Order and the students, carrying the memory of his lost family into the fight. When the smoke cleared, Aberforth was one of the few Dumbledores left to witness the aftermath. He buried his brother not as the greatest wizard of the age, but as a brother, flawed and complex. He walked away from the battlefield, not as a hero seeking glory, but as a survivor who had done what was necessary. He returned to the Hog's Head, the quiet watcher who had seen the deepest secrets of the Order of the Phoenix pass through his doors without ever revealing a single one. The reluctant fighters, the ones who stayed when faith failed, they were the foundation on which the entire resistance was truly built. Aberforth Dumbledore lived out his remaining years in the shadows of that inn, proof that even the heaviest, most reluctant heart can be the one that holds the line when it matters most. And in the end, That was enough. Aberforth understood that wars are not won by prophecies alone. They are survived by people. And when the end finally came for the First Wizarding War, it did not arrive through a grand strategy or a clever maneuver. It arrived through a betrayal spoken in a small house on a quiet autumn night. On the 31st of October, 1981, Lord Voldemort walked into the house in Godric's Hollow. He killed James Potter. He killed Lily Potter. And when he turned his wand on their son, the curse rebounded. The killing strike struck Voldemort himself. His body was destroyed. His soul was torn apart and fractured, and the First Wizarding War ended in a single silent moment. The relief across the wizarding world was immediate. It was deafening. The Death Eaters scattered into the night, claiming the imperious curse, burning their masks, fleeing the country. Across Britain, news of Voldemort's fall reached the survivors of the Order of the Phoenix. For them, it was not a victory rally. It was the final blow in a long and brutal conflict. The original order effectively dissolved, not with speeches, not with a formal disbandment, but with the heavy silence of people who had lost too many names to truly celebrate. Survivors grieved, they scattered, and they tried to live ordinary lives. Remus Lupin had just lost his two best friends. He withdrew completely from the wizarding world, carrying a grief that shadowed him for more than a decade. Sirius Black was chasing a traitor across London, consumed by a fury that would lead him straight to ruin. Alastor Moody retreated further into his paranoia, his magical eye spinning in an empty house, trusting no one. Kingsley Shacklebolt returned to ministry work, burying his grief in the steady, unfeeling rhythm of oral procedure. Arabella Figg sat alone in her silent house on Wisteria Walk. A watch over Harry suddenly felt less like a mission, and more like a lonely vigil over a past that refused to let her go. Daedalus Diggle celebrated publicly in the streets, his joy a stark contrast to the hollow silence in so many other homes. Elphius Doge wrote obituary after obituary for the Daily Prophet, reserving names that the ministry was already trying to forget. Rubeus Hagrid flew Sirius Black's motorcycle through the night sky and left a baby on a doorstep in Surrey. Aberforth Dumbledore watched it all from behind the bar of the Hog's Head, unmoved by the national relief. He knew the true cost had been paid in blood. He could still see on the stones of that ruined house. For Albus Dumbledore, there was no celebration. He stood in the wreckage of a family he had asked too much of, and he turned his attention to the quiet work of fading the Order out of existence, of laying the deepest possible foundations for a threat he knew would one day return, even if no one else believed it. But the appearance of a clean victory was a lie the wizarding world desperately wanted to believe. The apparent victory left hidden damage behind, broken minds, imprisoned innocents, and a traitor still free. Consider the Longbottoms. Frank and Alice had been Aurors, respected members of the original Order. In the weeks after Voldemort's fall, Bellatrix Lestrange and her companions, driven by a fanatical need for information or revenge, tracked them down. They tortured Frank and Alice with the Cruciatus Curse until their minds shattered beyond any hope of healing. They were left in a ward at St. Mungo's, hollow shells of the brave people they had been, visited by a son who would grow up never hearing his own parents speak a single word to him. This was not a war that had ended cleanly. This was the war continuing in the quietest possible way. Then there was Sirius Black, the man who had lost everything. He was betrayed by Peter Pettigrew, arrested on a street full of muggles, and cast into Azkaban without a trial. The ministry needed a villain. Peter needed a scapegoat. And Sirius Black, the brave man who had fought beside James and Lily, became a forgotten prisoner, his voice lost to the walls of a fortress in the sea. He was not just a tragic casualty of the aftermath. He was the perfect symbol of how the wizarding world had chosen to heal by looking away from the truth. And Peter Pettigrew himself, the traitor, he faked his death with a single explosion that killed a street full of muggles. He transformed himself into a rat and vanished into the sewers of London. And eventually, he hid himself in the home of a family, who would one day raise the boy he had betrayed. He settled into a fur coat, into a cage, into a pocket. He ticked away the years, warm and safe. He was the most dangerous secret no one suspected. The empty space in the Old Order photograph was not just an absence. It was a living, breathing threat, hiding in plain sight, waiting for a moment of fear to drive him back into the service of his master. The Order of the Phoenix was gone. The war was won. But in the depths of Azkaban, an innocent truth rotted away in the silence of a cell. In a hospital ward in London, two of the bravest Aurors the Order had ever known sat without memory, their minds scattered by cruelty. And in the shadows of an ordinary house, a traitor held the secret that could ruin everything, his tiny heart beating in time with the unspoken horror he carried. The danger had not ended. It had simply learned to wait. The original Order of the Phoenix, scattered after that Halloween night in 1981. Survivors grieved, buried their dead, and tried to piece together lives that had been completely shattered. For over a decade, the threat seemed to vanish. The Ministry declared Voldemort finished. His followers proclaimed themselves under the imperious curse and walked free. Life went on. But in the shadows, the quiet watchers remained. Arabella Figg stayed in her house on Prewett Drive. Daedalus Diggle kept his eccentric routines, and Harry Potter grew up completely unaware of the world that awaited him, or the storm that was quietly building just beyond the horizon of his ordinary life. That storm broke on the night of 24th June 1995. The third task of the Triwizard Tournament had ended in a maze of shifting hedges. Harry and Cedric Diggory, reaching the Triwizard Cup together, discovered it was a portkey. It seized them, dragging them through a whirlwind of colour and sound, and deposited them high on a hill overlooking a dark valley, the Little Hangleton graveyard. Under a vast starless sky, Voldemort returned to a body. The spell required bone of the father, flesh of the servant, and blood of the enemy. Wormtail performed the ritual. The Dark Lord rose again, tall, white-skinned, red-eyed, fully corporeal for the first time in over a decade. He summoned his Death Eaters. He unmasked himself. In the duel that followed, Harry fought alone, but his wand worked against Voldemort's. The Priori Incantatem effect drew forth shadowy echoes of the wand's previous victims, giving Harry a brief, terrifying window to escape. He seized Cedric's body, refusing to leave him behind in that graveyard, and shouted for the portkey to take him back. He returned to the Hogwarts grounds covered in blood, clutching the body of a murdered boy. He gave his warning. Voldemort was back. The Ministry refused to believe it. Albus Dumbledore immediately began rebuilding the Order of the Phoenix. He knew that denial would give Voldemort exactly what he needed. Time. Time to gather his forces. Time to recruit the Giants and the Dementors. Time to place his followers in key positions within the Ministry. While Cornelius Fudge spread lies and slander, branding Dumbledore a paranoid fool and Harry a deluded attention seeker, Dumbledore acted without waiting for permission or belief. The nature of the Order shifted entirely in that moment. It was no longer a memory of loss and sacrifice, a story from a faded photograph. It was an active resistance again. The mission was the same as before: watch, protect, gather intelligence, fight. But this time the enemy had already proven he could win. Dumbledore summoned the survivors of the First War, those who understood the cost. He called upon those who had been too young the first time, but had inherited the same loyalty. The headquarters at 12 Grimmauld Place became the heart of the renewed fight, a house that still breathed the secrets of those who had come before. And so the Order of the Phoenix began its second chapter, not with a grand declaration, but with a quiet summoning, with a vow renewed in the face of absolute disbelief. The warning was given. The time for denial was over. At 12 Grimmauld Place, old allies gathered around a scarred kitchen table beneath the portrait of Sirius Black's furious mother. Mad-Eye Moody brought suspicion and hard-earned experience. Remus Lupin brought patience, courage, and a connection to the werewolf community that no one else could match. Sirius, newly escaped and forced to live hidden inside his own family home. He gave the Order its headquarters despite the danger it placed upon him. Molly and Arthur Weasley offered something equally vital: a home, a family, and an unwavering willingness to stand between the darkness and their children. Others worked beyond the walls of Grimmauld Place. Kingsley Shacklebolt used his position in the Ministry to protect Harry's interests while appearing to hunt Sirius. Nymphadora Tonks, young, gifted, and fiercely determined, carried messages and joined dangerous missions. Hestia Jones, Emmeline Vance, Sturgis Podmore, and many more accepted that there would be no safety in simply looking away. Their first struggle was not a battle of spells. It was a battle for the truth. Voldemort understood that fear was most powerful when people could not name its source. The Ministry's refusal to acknowledge his return allowed him to move quietly. Death Eaters gathered. Creatures of the dark were approached. Secrets were stolen. And every day that Fudge insisted there was nothing to fear was another day Voldemort grew stronger. The Order watched the Ministry, guarded the prophecy hidden in the Department of Mysteries, and tried to keep Harry alive long enough to understand why Voldemort wanted him dead. They were fighting a war before most of the wizarding world even realised a war had begun. Harry Potter returns from the Little Hangleton graveyard with Cedric Diggory's body and a truth the Ministry of Magic refuses to believe. Lord Voldemort has returned, but the wizarding world chooses denial. Albus Dumbledore does not hesitate. The war has begun again, and for the second time in his life, he must build a hidden resistance. A secret army needs a secret base. Sirius Black offers his inherited family home as the Order's new headquarters. Number 12. Grimmauld Place is a gloomy townhouse in London, concealed between two Muggle buildings, invisible to anyone who does not know the secret. For Sirius, this house holds nothing but dark memories. It is the home of his parents, pureblood fanatics who blasted his name off the family tapestry when he ran away. It is filled with cursed objects, a screaming portrait of his mother, and a house elf named Creature who echoes every prejudice of the Black family line. Sirius offers it to Dumbledore with grim purpose, turning a monument to hatred into a fortress for the light. The house is protected by the Fidelius charm, with Dumbledore as secret keeper. This is the deepest magical concealment in the wizarding world. The secret of the location lives inside Dumbledore alone, and it cannot be taken from him by force or by torture. No one who has not received the secret directly from him can find the headquarters. The Order has a sanctuary. The Death Eaters cannot reach them here. Behind its cursed doors, a fractured resistance becomes a temporary family for Harry, Ron, Hermione, and the Weasleys. Molly Weasley moves into the kitchen and tries to scrub the gloom away with sheer maternal warmth. Arthur Weasley brings his quiet courage. Fred and George fill the silence with mischief. Harry lives alongside his godfather for the first time, and Sirius paces the halls, desperate to be useful. The house is dark and hostile. The portraits of dead Blacks shout insults from the walls. Creature mutters curses from the shadows. But there is laughter in the kitchen and loyalty in the drawing room. The Order meets in the basement, planning missions, gathering intelligence, while upstairs the younger generation prepares for a war the Ministry refuses to acknowledge. 12 Grimmauld Place becomes the crucible of the reconstituted Order. It is a strange sanctuary, born from pureblood pride and given freely to the Resistance. The walls that once held dark secrets now shelter the people who will fight against them. And from this hidden house, the members of the Order begin to spread across the country, each one taking their place in a silent war that will reshape the wizarding world. Remus Lupin travels where he is least welcome, living among werewolves and listening for signs that Voldemort is gathering followers from the margins. Nymphadora Tonks uses her skill as an Auror and her gift for changing her appearance to carry messages and watch dangerous places. Kingsley Shacklebolt works inside the Ministry itself, where he must serve an institution that is actively hunting Sirius while quietly protecting him. Alastor Moody, scarred by a lifetime of combat, sees threats everywhere because he has survived the consequences of ignoring them. Their work is slow, uncertain, and dangerous. They watch the movements of known Death Eaters. They guard the prophecy stored in the Department of Mysteries. They search for allies before fear can drive those allies into Voldemort's hands. Every mission takes place under a cloud of official lies. Cornelius Fudge insists that Dumbledore is spreading panic for power, and the Daily Prophet repeats the accusation until much of Britain accepts it as fact. The Order is not only fighting Voldemort's servants, it is fighting disbelief. That disbelief isolates Harry more deeply than any locked door. He knows what he saw in the graveyard. He watched Cedric die. He saw Voldemort rise again in a body of flesh and blood. Yet adults speak around him, protect him with silence, and keep the Order's plans hidden from him. At Grimmauld Place, Harry is safe, but he does not feel safe. He hears fragments of conversations through closed doors and understands that the war is already moving without him. Sirius feels that frustration too, confined to the house because the Ministry would arrest him on sight. He is a prisoner in the place he once escaped. Grimmauld Place gives him purpose, but it also forces him to confront the life his family tried to impose upon him. His anger is never far away. He wants action, risk, and open skies. Instead, he waits behind dark curtains while others carry the fight beyond the front door. The house also contains a danger no one fully recognizes. Kreacher obeys Sirius reluctantly, but his loyalty belongs to the old black ideals and to the memory of Sirius's mother. He listens. He remembers. In a war built on secrets, even a bitter house elf can become a weapon in the wrong hands. Still, the Order endures. Its members are united not by comfort or certainty, but by the refusal to surrender truth. They know Voldemort thrives when people are afraid to say his name, afraid to act, and afraid to believe the evidence before them. Inside number 12, Grimmauld Place, the Resistance prepares for the moment when denial will no longer be possible. With headquarters secured behind the Fidelius charm at 12 Grimmauld Place, the Order of the Phoenix faced the far more difficult challenge of actually functioning as a secret resistance. The house was a haven, but every member who walked out its front door was a target. The Ministry considered them liars. The Death Eaters were hunting them. The first question was simple. How do you run a war when you cannot trust a single owl in the sky? The answer was elegant and deeply personal. Members communicated through Patronus messages, allowing swift contact without ordinary letters being intercepted. A Patronus is difficult for a dark wizard to produce. The spell requires a genuine happy memory, and the corruption inside a Death Eater usually makes the magic unstable. It became the Order's seal of authenticity. In the dim hallways of Grimmauld Place, a silver weasel or a hulking badger or a slender lynx would appear out of the air. It would speak in the exact voice of the caster, deliver a brief warning or a piece of intelligence, and then dissolve into the shadows. There was no paper to steal, no owl to follow. A Patronus could find its target anywhere, hand over a message, and leave no trace. It was the perfect tool for a war fought in the cracks of the wizarding world. This network of silver messengers allowed the Order to coordinate a sprawling, invisible web of operations. The war was fought on watch, not in open battle most of the time. They watched the Ministry of Magic day and night, tracking the movements of known Death Eaters and the subtle spread of the Imperious Curse through its corridors. They guarded Harry Potter as closely as they could, placing Aurors like Tonks and Shacklebolt near his home and his school, watching from the shadows. They escorted vulnerable allies out of reach, moving Muggle-born families and known dissidents from one safe house to another, always one step ahead of the Snatchers. And they tracked Death Eater movement across the country, mapping where the Dark Mark appeared, predicting where the next attack would fall. It was a war of constant vigilance, of waiting in cold hallways, of trusting a silver animal to carry the words that would save a life. But Dumbledore knew that defending against Voldemort's attacks would never be enough to win the war. The Dark Lord was building an army, from the very people the wizarding world had abandoned. So Dumbledore also sought alliances with giants, goblins and werewolves, knowing Voldemort is recruiting from the margins. The giants were the first priority. Voldemort had already sent his own messengers to the mountains, offering the giants the freedom to destroy. Dumbledore sent Rubeus Hagrid, a half-giant who had suffered cruelty his entire life, to offer a different path. Hagrid and Madame Maxime travelled deep into the mountains and found the giant colony. The negotiations were brutal. The Death Eaters had already poisoned the giants against Dumbledore, promising them blood and territory. Hagrid returned scarred and defeated, with only his tiny brother Grawp to show for the effort. The giants chose Voldemort. The werewolves were a different wound. Fenrir Greyback had pledged his pack to Voldemort in exchange for the freedom to attack children. Dumbledore asked Remus Lupin to approach them. Lupin was a werewolf himself. He knew their loneliness, their rage at a society that had rejected them. He walked into the heart of the werewolf packs, trying to find any who would listen. He found almost none. The hatred ran too deep. The werewolves saw Voldemort as the only leader who would let them take revenge for a lifetime of persecution. The goblins were the third front. Dumbledore had always treated them with a respect most wizards refused to offer. He knew that Voldemort would eventually try to seize Gringotts. He opened a careful line of communication, hoping the goblins would see the danger. But the goblins were proud and cautious. They had seen wizards break promises for centuries. They chose to stay neutral, watching both sides, waiting to see who would win. It was a gamble that left the Order without control over the wizarding economy. Despite these setbacks, the Order held. The members lived double lives. Arthur Weasley worked inside the Ministry, playing the harmless bureaucrat, while he fed intelligence back to the Resistance. Kingsley Shacklebolt moved silently through the Auror office, steering suspicion away from the Order and toward the true Death Eaters. Molly Weasley ran the household, turning the kitchen table into a command centre where maps were studied and rosters were planned. The house itself was a fortress of secrets, protected by the Fidelius charm, guarded by a bitter house elf, and filled with the lingering sorrow of a war that had never really ended. The methods of the New Order were born of exhaustion and necessity. A small group, facing a vast conspiracy that had the Ministry in its grip, used silver animals to carry their warnings, identity their allies, and hold the fragile network together. They watched, they waited, they moved in secret. They tried desperately to build alliances that kept collapsing, and they kept the faith that the darkness would not last forever. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. The New Order built its resistance on shifting foundations. Secret messages delivered by Patronus, watchers at the Ministry, escorts for the hunted. Every member was a thread in a much larger web, connected by Dumbledore's trust and a shared refusal to submit. But webs are fragile. They need strong fibres to hold against the dark. And no fibre was as unexpected or as brightly coloured as the young Auror who arrived at 12 Grimmauld Place with a grin that changed depending on the day. Nymphadora Tonks. She insisted everyone call her just Tonks, her first name feeling too frilly for someone who tripped over her own feet. She was an Auror, the youngest in a generation, trained under the watchful eye of Alastor Moody. But what truly set her apart was the way she looked. She was a metamorph magus. Her hair could shift from shocking pink to bright blue in the space of a single thought. Her entire appearance was a canvas she painted moment to moment. This was not a gimmick. It was the outward reflection of a spirit that refused to settle. The Order had never seen a recruit quite like her. She embodied the restless energy of the Resistance itself, impossible to pin down, impossible to forget. Her first assignments for the Order were quiet, guard duty at Grimmauld Place, where she had to keep the curtains closed and the voices low, escort missions moving valuable allies from one safe house to another. She was clumsy in her downtime. She knocked things over. She fell through doors. But her humour and clumsiness were a mask. When her wand was in her hand, that mask fell away. She had the reflexes of a seasoned duelist. She fought in the Department of Mysteries, holding her own against Death Eaters, who had spent decades in the dark. She flew as a decoy during the Battle of the Seven Potters, risking her life so that Harry might reach safety. In open battle, she was fearless. The war changed her. Grief began to settle into her features. Her hair, once a kaleidoscope, started to stay a dull, mousy brown. The weight of the fight pressed down on her. But in that darkness, she found a home. Remus Lupin, two people who had never quite belonged, finding a home in one another. Their love was a quiet rebellion against the war, a promise that joy could still exist in the middle of ruin. They married. A son was born. Edward Remus Lupin, Teddy. The war did not grant them much time. They fought at the Battle of Hogwarts. They fell within hours of each other, leaving their son an orphan. But Teddy was not left alone, and the love they shared had given them a brief, perfect home before the end. Teddy Lupin grew up surrounded by the ghosts of the Order, raised by his grandmother Andromeda. He became a child of two wars, born into the aftermath, and the Order itself as an organisation faded. But the people who survived carried the work into peacetime. They rebuilt the Ministry. They healed the wounded. They made sure the world Harry Potter fought for was a world worth living in, and in that world, the memory of Nymphadora Tonks lived on. Not just as a soldier, but as a woman who defied the darkness by refusing to give up her colour. Her legacy was written in the people she protected. In Harry, who remembered the warmth behind her jokes. In Ron and Hermione, who saw how courage could look like laughter. In Teddy, who inherited her gift and her ability to transform, carrying a flash of bright hair into a generation that had known too much grey. Harry became Teddy's godfather, determined that the boy would never doubt how fiercely his parents had loved him. Andromeda gave him a home. The surviving members of the Order gave him stories of his mother arriving late, knocking over an umbrella stand, then disarming an opponent before anyone else had raised a wand. Stories of pink hair, sharp instincts, and a voice that could make even the bleakest room feel less empty. Tonks never wanted to be treated like a symbol. She would likely have laughed at the idea. But symbols are not always chosen. Sometimes they are created by the way a person stands when everyone else is afraid to move, by the way they keep their sense of humour when the world is trying to take it away, by the way they choose love when fear insists that love is too dangerous. That was Nymphadora Tonks, an Auror, a metamorph magus, a wife, a mother, and a fighter in the Order of the Phoenix. She was never polished, never predictable, and never willing to become the quiet, colourless person the darkness demanded. Even after her final battle, the brightness she carried remained, not in a spell or a monument, but in the lives she helped save. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. Voldemort's followers wanted a world ruled by blood, fear, and obedience. Tonks answered them simply by being herself, loud when she needed to be, kind when it mattered most, brave when bravery came at the highest cost. Her colour never truly disappeared. It lived on in Teddy, in the memory of the Order, and in every small act of defiance that proved the dark could never claim everything. Tonks brought a youthful energy to the Order, a flash of shifting colour in a world growing relentlessly darker. But the reconstituted Order was built on a foundation of deep, unresolved suspicion, and no single figure embodied that tension more completely than Severus Snape. Where Tonks was a fresh face, openly welcomed by most of her comrades, Snape was the man standing firmly in the shadows, a figure from the Order's darkest chapters whose very presence fractured the unity of the new resistance. His return to the Order's ranks was not a welcome reunion. It was the subject of fierce, silent argument that haunted the halls of 12 Grimmauld Place. Upon Voldemort's return, Snape's position was the most dangerous and vital of any member of the Order of the Phoenix. He returned to the Dark Lord's side, playing the role of the repentant Death Eater who had never truly stopped serving. This was the heart of his purpose. He returned to Voldemort's circle while secretly feeding information back to Dumbledore. Through his mastery of occlumency, he shielded his true thoughts and emotions from Voldemort's legilimency. He fed the Dark Lord carefully curated intelligence, designed to keep the Death Eaters occupied and suspicious of their own, while pouring every piece of sensitive information on the Dark Lord's movements directly into Dumbledore's waiting ear. This made him the Order's most invaluable asset. Without Snape, the Order would have been fighting blind. It was Snape who confirmed Voldemort's return to the Order before the Ministry would accept it. It was Snape who gave the crucial warning that led the rescue party to the Department of Mysteries. It was Snape who carried the knowledge of the Dark Lord's plans for the Ministry and for Hogwarts. He was the single thread connecting the Order to the inner workings of the enemy. Yet this same role made him impossible for many Order members to trust, especially Sirius Black. Within the walls of Grimmauld Place, Sirius and Snape circled each other like sworn enemies, which they were. Sirius saw nothing but a former Death Eater, and the man whose actions had delivered the prophecy to Voldemort, sealing the fate of James and Lily Potter. He saw the man who had bullied his godson and tortured students. Snape, in turn, saw a man who had escaped justice through his family name and a life of reckless privilege. Dumbledore had ordered them to cooperate for the greater good, but the ceasefire between them was a cold and brittle thing that could shatter with a single word. This made Snape's role uniquely isolating. He had the complete confidence of the Order's leader, but could never earn the trust of the soldiers. He was a spy in both camps, a man who walked completely alone. The Order fought on through the long months of the Second War, and Snape played his terrible role to its logical conclusion. On the night of Dumbledore's death, Snape cast the killing curse himself, an act so absolute that it seemed to answer the question of his allegiance permanently. The Order believed him to be a traitor. Harry Potter believed him to be a monster. His true allegiance remained one of the Order's deepest mysteries, a secret known only to the man who had already fallen. It was only after his own death, at the fangs of Nagini in the Shrieking Shack, that the truth finally emerged. His memories, given freely to Harry in the Pensieve, revealed the full, heartbreaking portrait of the man between sides. It was a man who had asked Voldemort to spare a single life, and when that life was taken, devoted the remainder of his miserable existence to protecting her son. Dumbledore had kept the secret of his greatest, most broken soldier. The Order had fought alongside a man who was never fully one of them, and a protector they never fully recognized until it was far too late. He was a man built from regret and a single impossible promise. His allegiance was to the memory of Lily Potter, to the cause of Dumbledore, and to the survival of Harry Potter, a redemption arc so deeply buried that it could only be unearthed by death. But the war was not won by the spy alone. It was won in the open, by a family bound not by blood but by shared purpose, trusting the ones beside them even when they could not trust the one in the dark. The strength of the Order was not just in its secrets, but in the unshakable resolve of its oldest members and their willingness to sacrifice everything for the next generation. While Severus Snape walked the knife's edge between two masters, other members of the Order took up positions that were less dramatic but no less vital. Arthur Weasley was one of them. Arthur worked at the Ministry of Magic, in the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office, a department that seemed trivial but gave him cover. He could move through the ministry without raising suspicion, and he used that access to gather information, to watch for signs of Death Eater infiltration, and to quietly support the Order's operations. Arthur was not present in the original Order photograph, the one taken in the 1970s, but when the Order was reconstituted after Voldemort's return, he was summoned. He joined the protective network around Harry and the Order. He escorted Harry from Prewett Drive. He stood guard at the Department of Mysteries, and he fought alongside the others, when the battle came, but Arthur's greatest contribution was perhaps the most ordinary. He kept his head down and his eyes open, a steady presence in a world that was rapidly unravelling. Molly Weasley is not always counted as a formal member of the Order. Her name does not appear on the list of those who assembled at Grimmauld Place for official meetings. But if you look closely at how the Order functioned, you see that Grimmauld Place itself ran on her labour, her vigilance and her ferocity. She cooked and cleaned and healed and managed the endless logistics of a secret headquarters. She knitted sweaters that carried protective enchantments, and she kept the house from falling into complete disrepair. But more than that, Molly was the emotional anchor. She mothered not just her own children, but Harry and Hermione and anyone else who passed through those doors. And when the Order faced its darkest moments, when the losses mounted and the fear threatened to swallow everything, it was Molly who refused to break. She was not a spy or a strategist, but she was a force of nature. Her ferocity became legendary. No one who saw her face off against Bellatrix Lestrange at the Battle of Hogwarts could ever doubt that the Order of the Phoenix had no more fierce a defender than Molly Weasley. The Weasley home, the Burrow, served as a different kind of sanctuary. For years, it had been a warm, cluttered haven where Harry first experienced what a real family felt like. But after Dumbledore's death, when Grimmauld Place could no longer be safely used, the Burrow became the Order's new headquarters. The protective enchantments were strengthened, and the house became a fortress of sorts, though it never lost its homely character. The Burrow was where the Order regrouped, where they planned the final stages of the war, and where Harry spent his last summer before the hunt for Horcruxes began. It was a place of safety in a world that had become a battlefield, and it stood as a testament to everything the Weasleys represented: resilience, loyalty, and the quiet courage of ordinary people who choose to resist. The Weasley resistance was not limited to Arthur and Molly. Their children became central figures in the fight against Voldemort. Fred and George brought their own brand of rebellious brilliance, and Ginny stood firm in Dumbledore's army. But the foundation of it all was the love that Arthur and Molly built, a love that extended beyond blood and made their home a refuge for anyone who needed it. As the war escalated, other families would offer their own forms of resistance, some in silence, some in sacrifice, and the story of the Order is also the story of these many threads woven together. Among those threads were the Tonkses, whose story carried both devotion and tragedy. Nymphadora Tonks entered the Order as a young Auror, gifted, determined, and far more capable than her clumsy first impression suggested. As a metamorph magus, she could alter her appearance at will, a rare talent that made her especially valuable for reconnaissance and protection. She guarded Harry, fought at the Department of Mysteries, and remained active even as the danger around her grew unbearable. Her marriage to Remus Lupin brought her into one of the war's most painful stories, but it also showed the kind of hope the Order struggled to preserve, the belief that love and a future were still possible, even in the shadow of Voldemort. Arthur Weasley kept the Order grounded in the Ministry, and Molly kept it alive within the walls of Grimmauld Place. But the Order was not a family of perfect soldiers. It was a coalition of the willing, and the cost of relying on some was heavier than others. Take Sturgis Podmore. He was there in the beginning, grinning broadly in that old photograph. A loyal foot soldier, cheerful and willing. Dumbledore trusted him with the deepest secrets of the war. He was assigned to guard the prophecy in the Department of Mysteries. But then the news came. Sturgis Podmore was arrested. He had been found attempting to enter the protected headquarters under highly suspicious circumstances. It looked like a betrayal. He was sentenced to 6 long months in Azkaban. The Order was shaken, but the truth eventually surfaced. Sturgis was no traitor. He had been placed under the Imperious Curse by Lucius Malfoy, forced to try and steal the prophecy for Voldemort. His loyalty was never in question, but his body had been weaponized against him. The scars of Azkaban did not just damage his reputation, they hurt the Order's strength. Then there was Emmeline Vance. Unlike the crooks and oddballs, Emmeline was a figure of quiet grace and steely competence. She appeared in the same old photograph, a calm presence among the chaos. When the Order was reformed, she was right back in the thick of it. She took on one of the most dangerous jobs in the organisation, escorting Harry Potter. She was part of the advance guard that flew him away from the Dursleys in the dead of night. She stood her ground, but the path of an Order member was a short one for many. Not long after the war fully erupted, word reached the Order that Emmeline Vance had been murdered by Death Eaters. Her death was a brutal reminder that no one was safe. Every mission, every simple escort could be your last. And then there was Mundungus Fletcher. If you had to point to a weak link in the chain, Mundungus was it. Dumbledore kept him around because he knew the seedy underbelly of the wizarding world. He supplied contacts, stolen goods for schemes, and information pulled from the lowest of low places. He was useful, but he was never reliable. He was a creature of self-preservation first and foremost. When Voldemort finally struck directly during the flight of the Seven Potters, the Order was moving Harry to safety. Mundungus was paired with Mad-Eye Moody, riding the same broomstick. But the moment Voldemort appeared, Mundungus's courage evaporated. He panicked. He performed a cowardly disapparition, vanishing completely and leaving Mad-Eye completely exposed to Voldemort's killing curse. Alistair Moody, the greatest Auror of the age, died in that moment because the man meant to watch his back was only ever watching out for himself. Mundungus did not just flee. He cost the Order its sharpest eye. 3 members, 1 family. The loyal soldier broken by a curse, the graceful fighter struck down in the shadows, and the unreliable ally whose fear melted the Order's strongest shield. The war did not just take lives. It revealed the cracks in the armour, the fragile threads holding the resistance together, and as those threads snapped, the full weight of the coming storm began to settle on the shoulders of those who remained. Among those shoulders were the people who had already lost everything once before. Frank and Alice Longbottom had been fierce fighters in the First War Aurors, Aurors who defied Voldemort 3 times and survived when so many did not. But after Voldemort fell, Bellatrix Lestrange and the other Death Eaters came for them. They tortured Frank and Alice with the Crucusticus, desperate to learn where their master had gone. The attack did not kill them, but it destroyed the lives they knew. They were left in St. Mungo's, unable to recognize the son they had fought to protect. Their tragedy was a warning written in human form. Victory did not always mean survival. Sometimes it meant living with wounds no spell could heal. Remus Lupin understood that better than almost anyone. He had spent his whole life treated as an outcast because of his lycanthropy, denied work, stability, and the ordinary future other wizards took for granted. Yet when Dumbledore called, Remus returned. He became a spy among the werewolves, entering the dangerous world of Fenrir, Greyback, and men who had every reason to hate the society that rejected them. It was lonely work. It was terrifying work, and it brought the Order very little comfort, because Remus could never be sure who might be watching or ready to sell him out. Then there was Nymphadora Tonks, young, gifted, and bright enough to make even Grimmauld Place feel less like a tomb. She was an Auror, a metamorph Magus, and one of the Order's most capable defenders. But war changed her too. It dimmed her hair, drained her confidence, and forced her to confront the possibility that love and duty could pull a person apart. Even so, Tonks kept fighting. She guarded Harry, faced Death Eaters, and stood beside Remus when both of them had been given countless reasons to run. The Order survived because people like these refused to disappear, not because they were fearless, but because fear had stopped being a reason to stay home. Every member carried a different burden. Some carried grief, some carried secrets, some carried guilt, and some carried the names of friends they knew they would never see again. The previous chapter left us with Sturgis Podmore trapped in Azkaban and Emmeline Vance killed in the line of duty. The war was consuming the Order of the Phoenix, even while the Ministry of Magic refused to believe the war existed. The core of the Order knew that Voldemort was consolidating power, searching for a weapon, and waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment arrived when he exploited the connection he shared with Harry Potter. In June of 1996, Harry experiences a vision of Sirius Black being tortured inside the Department of Mysteries at the Ministry of Magic. It is a false vision, deliberately planted by Voldemort to lure Harry out of the protection of Hogwarts. It works perfectly. Harry, isolated by Dumbledore's distance and unable to reach anyone at Grimmauld Place, decides he must save his godfather himself. He gathers Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Neville and Luna. They ride Thestrals to London and enter the Ministry building through the visitors' entrance. The Department of Mysteries is the deepest and most secret level of the Ministry. It is a place dedicated to the study of the most fundamental magical questions: love, death, time, space, and the nature of prophecy itself. Harry and his friends cross into the Hall of Prophecy and find the small glass orb that bears his name. It is the weapon Voldemort has been seeking, and finding it springs the trap. Death Eaters, led by Lucius Malfoy, surround them. The battle begins. They race through the strangest rooms in the magical world. The Space Room, where an infinite array of planets and floating orbs fill the chamber. The Time Room, where hourglasses and clocks tick at different speeds. The Brain Room, where luminous, swirling brains swim in a tank of liquid thought. And the Death Chamber, dominated by the Veil, a stone archway draped with a torn curtain that whispers and moves even when there is no air to stir it. The students fight a running battle through these rooms. They are outnumbered and outmatched, but they hold their ground, trying to survive until help arrives. Then the Order arrives. Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks, Kingsley Shacklebolt, Alastor Moody, Arthur Weasley, and Sirius Black himself burst into the prophecy chamber. The room becomes a full war zone. Curses fly between the shelves. Order members and Death Eaters clash in the narrow aisles. Prophecy orbs shatter around them. The duel that matters most takes place in the Death Chamber. Sirius Black confronts his cousin Bellatrix Lestrange. He is faster than her. He is dodging every curse she sends at him. He is taunting her. For a moment, he looks like he is winning, and then a jet of red light catches him square in the chest. The laughter fades from his face. He falls backward through the ancient stone archway. The tattered veil flutters around him. He passes through it completely. He is gone. Harry screams. He chases Bellatrix into the Ministry atrium. He tries to use the Cruciatus curse on her, but it does not work. He is not a killer. Voldemort appears. Dumbledore arrives. The duel that follows shatters the Fountain of Magical Brethren and finally shatters the Ministry's denial of the war. Cornelius Fudge watches the Dark Lord fight Dumbledore with his own eyes. He can no longer deny the truth. Voldemort's return is proven beyond any doubt. The battle ends, but the war has changed forever. The Order has lost Sirius Black, one of its most passionate members and the owner of its headquarters. The Ministry is forced to accept Dumbledore's leadership and ally with the Resistance. The secrecy that protected the Order is gone. The war is in the open. Every member of the Order knows that the fight ahead will be harder than anything they have faced so far. The Ministry must choose whether it can stand beside Dumbledore or whether it will fall in the darkness to come. In the months that follow, the Ministry begins rebuilding its defences, but its new certainty does not make it wiser. Rufus Scrimgeour replaces Fudge as Minister for Magic and tries to turn Harry into a symbol of official resistance. Harry refuses. He has seen too clearly how easily the Ministry abandoned the truth when it was inconvenient. For the Order, Sirius's death is more than a personal tragedy. Grimmauld Place remains their headquarters, but every room now carries the absence of the man who gave them shelter. Harry inherits Sirius's house, his possessions, and the loyalty of Kreacher, the Black family house elf. That inheritance will soon reveal secrets buried within the house itself. Dumbledore understands that Voldemort's hunt for the prophecy has failed, But the Dark Lord has other plans. He no longer needs a weapon hidden in the Ministry. He is preparing to seize the entire wizarding world. And as the Order mourns its losses, Dumbledore begins searching for the one path that might make Voldemort mortal again. The Battle of the Department of Mysteries had left its deepest wound in Harry Potter. Sirius Black was gone. The Order of the Phoenix had lost one of its most fearless members, and Harry had lost the closest thing to a parent he had left. The year that followed was a strange and heavy time. Dumbledore barely spoke to Harry, carrying a burden he could not yet share. The Ministry, which had denied the Dark Lord's return for so long, was now forced to admit the truth. But instead of uniting against the enemy, they turned their suspicion on the very people who had been right all along. The Order continued its work from the shadows of 12 Grimmauld Place. The house itself felt more oppressive than ever before. The portrait of Sirius's mother screamed louder. The curtains were drawn. The members moved through the hallways like ghosts, discussing missions in hushed tones. The war was no longer a threat on the horizon. It was here, and it was hungry. All of this came to a head on the night of the 30th of June, 1997. Harry and Dumbledore had just returned from a desperate mission to retrieve a Horcrux from a cave by the sea. Dumbledore was weak. The potion he had been forced to drink had drained him of his strength, his voice barely a whisper. They arrived at the top of the astronomy tower at Hogwarts. In that moment, the headmaster was at his most vulnerable. Death Eaters had already infiltrated the castle, using a vanishing cabinet to smuggle themselves in. Draco Malfoy cornered them, his wand shaking, but he could not bring himself to deliver the killing blow. He had been tasked by Voldemort with this murder, a punishment for his father's failures, and his courage failed him at the final moment. Then Severus Snape arrived, and Snape did what he had sworn to his master he would do. A single word, a flash of green light. The killing curse struck Albus Dumbledore in the chest and blasted him from the tower, his body falling into the darkness of the grounds below. The greatest wizard of the age was dead. To the Order, and to everyone watching, this was the deepest betrayal. Almost no one understood the plan that had been set in motion years before. The spy had killed the leader. The heart of the Order was gone. Dumbledore's death did not just break their spirit, it broke their security. The headquarters at 12 Grimmauld Place was protected by the Fidelius charm. When Dumbledore cast it to protect the Order, he made himself the sole secret keeper. This meant that no one else could reveal the location of the house, not even if they wanted to. The secret was locked inside his mind. When Dumbledore died, that lock shattered. The secret was transferred to everyone who had ever heard it. Every Order member who had stood in that house, who had been told the address, now carried the weight of the secret themselves. They were all secret keepers. This was a devastating vulnerability. If even one of them was captured, the location of their headquarters was no longer a secret. The Order knew it was only a matter of time before a Death Eater captured a member, or the information was torn from a mind with the Cruciatus curse. Their sanctuary was no longer safe. It was a ticking clock that the Order could hear but could not silence. The Order had no choice. They had to abandon 12 Grimmauld Place, the house that had been their base, their refuge, and their symbol of resistance was lost. They needed a new centre. They found it at the Burrow, the home of the Weasley family. The Burrow was not a fortress. It was a warm, chaotic, living home filled with the scent of Molly's cooking and the sound of enchanted knitting needles. But it became the new heart of the Order's resistance. The Battle of the Seven Potters, fought just weeks after Dumbledore's death, was staged from the Burrow. Mad-Eye Moody was killed by Voldemort himself. Hedwig was struck down. George Weasley lost an ear to Snape's dark magic. The cost of simply moving Harry from one safe house to another was devastating. The wedding of Bill and Fleur took place at the Burrow in the height of the summer. It was a bright, defiant act of hope, but the celebration was cut short by the arrival of a Patronus, bringing the news that the Ministry had fallen. The Minister for Magic was dead. The war had come to the doorstep of the Weasley home, and there was no going back. From the burrow, the central trio of Harry, Ron, and Hermione would set out alone, pursuing the Horcruxes that held the key to Voldemort's destruction. The Order did not fully understand where they had gone, or what they were doing. The resistance fragmented. It became a network of individuals, fighting in the dark, trusting only in the Patronuses that carried their messages. Some members went into hiding. Some continued to fight through the underground Potterwatch radio network. Others watched over the vulnerable, protecting the families of Muggleborns and the homes of the missing. The house was lost. The leader was dead. The war had entered its most desperate phase. The members of the Order who survived this long, who kept fighting through the darkness of 1997 and 98, were the remnants of a family that had been shattered. They scattered to prepare for what was to come. They did not know when the final blow would fall. Most of them knew only that it was coming and that Hogwarts would be the ground where they would make their stand. With Dumbledore dead, the protections of the Order were evaporating far faster than anyone could account for. Grimmauld Place was no longer a sanctuary. The secret was out, carried inside the minds of too many people who might fall into the hands of the Death Eaters, and Harry himself, bound by blood protection to Prewett Drive until his 17th birthday, was about to become the most exposed target in the wizarding world. The Order devised a desperate stratagem for the night of the escape. 7 decoys would leave Prewett Drive, each disguised as Harry Potter to confuse Voldemort's hunters. Polyjuice Potion transformed Ron, Fred, George, Fleur Delacour, Mundungus Fletcher, and Hermione Granger into exact replicas of the Chosen One. Even the real Harry was made to look like just another decoy. Each was paired with a protector. Remus Lupin took George, Arthur Weasley took Fred, Nymphadora Tonks took Ron, Kingsley Shacklebolt took Hermione, Bill Weasley took Fleur, Alistair Moody took Mundungus, and Rubeus Hagrid, riding the giant motorbike of Sirius Black, took the real Harry into the night. The deception was compromised before it truly began. Someone had betrayed the timing, or the Ministry had traced the Flu network. The Death Eaters were waiting in the sky over Little Winging. The air thickened with curses and cloaked riders. During the chaos, Hedwig, Harry's loyal snowy owl, broke free of her cage to defend him. She was struck by a killing curse and fell into the darkness, the first casualty of the flight. George Weasley lost an ear to a curse fired by Severus Snape. The curse was not meant to kill George, but it sliced through flesh all the same. A permanent reminder of how close the family had come to losing a son. The worst loss came later. Mad-Eye Moody died because Mundungus Fletcher panicked and abandoned him. When Mundungus disapparated without warning, Moody was left alone, facing Lord Voldemort. The great Auror fell from his broom, struck by the killing curse, and his body was never recovered by the Order. The escape proved that Voldemort's regime was closing in, and that every remaining mission might become a last stand. The Ministry had already fallen from within. The Death Eaters had infiltrated every level. The Order had lost its leader, its headquarters, and one of its most formidable soldiers in a single season. Safety was an illusion. The Burrow, once a home full of warmth, was now a fortress of grief. Mad-Eye Moody was gone. George was scarred. Harry had watched his owl die in the flight to survive. From this point forward, every operation carried the weight of a definitive end. The Order gathered one last time for Bill and Fleur's wedding, a fragile celebration held under a golden enchantment. It was a moment of defiance, a promise that the Weasleys would not let fear dictate their lives. But even as the guests danced, the Ministry fell entirely. The world outside the Burrow's protective boundaries was no longer safe. The Order, once a cohesive resistance, fractured into a loose network of survivors, each forced into hiding, each waiting for the moment they would be called to fight a war that was swiftly becoming unwinnable. Then came the message that ended the celebration in an instant. Rufus Scrimgeour was dead. The Ministry had been seized. The wedding guests scattered under a storm of fear, abandoning the tents and music as Death Eaters closed in. Harry, Ron and Hermione fled together, carrying almost nothing except the burden Dumbledore had left behind. Their task was no longer theoretical. They had to find and destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes before he could make himself truly invincible. Yet the Order could offer little direct support. Too many members were being watched. Too many homes had been compromised. Communication became dangerous, and trust became rarer still. At Grimmauld Place, the trio discovered how deeply the enemy had poisoned the Ministry. Dolores Umbridge had returned to power, now directing the persecution of Muggle-born witches and wizards. Families were summoned before cruel tribunals and forced to prove bloodlines that did not matter. Those who could not satisfy the new regime disappeared into Azkaban or fled into hiding. Outside London, resistance survived in whispers. Lee Jordan's forbidden radio broadcast, Otterwatch, carried news that the Ministry refused to report. It named the missing, honoured the dead, and reminded frightened listeners that Voldemort had not conquered every heart. Members of the Order used false names over the airwaves, protecting themselves while sending hope across a country ruled by terror. At Hogwarts, Severus Snape became headmaster, while the Carrows turned the school into a place of punishment and indoctrination. Students were taught to fear kindness, to admire cruelty, and to accept the Dark Lord's version of history. But Neville Longbottom, Ginny Weasley, and Luna Lovegood refused to surrender. They revived Dumbledore's army in secret, resisting in the corridors, sabotaging the Carrows, and keeping alive the belief that Hogwarts still belonged to those willing to defend it. The war had changed. There were no safe houses left, no clear front lines, and no certainty that help would arrive. But beneath the silence, the Order endured. Scattered, hunted and grieving, its members continued to choose resistance over surrender. The Battle of the Seven Potters cost the Order one of its most formidable warriors. Mad-Eye Moody was dead, killed when Mundungus Fletcher abandoned him in a moment of panic. The Ministry had fallen to Voldemort's control. Scrimgeour was dead. The Order was scattered, its members hunted, its purpose unclear, and Harry, Ron and Hermione were alone in the wilderness, following a trail of Horcruxes that led them further from the world they were trying to save. While they were away, that world was remade in a dark image. Hogwarts, the ancient school of witchcraft and wizardry, was no longer a sanctuary. It became a place of punishment. Under the rule of Severus Snape as headmaster and the brutal Carrow siblings as teachers, the castle became a fortress of fear. Students were forced to practice the Cruciatus Curse. Acts of kindness and loyalty were punished as rebellion. The corridors echoed with the sound of students being dragged to detention, a word that had come to mean torture. Yet resistance survived. It survived in the form of secret lessons, held in the Room of Requirement, where Neville Longbottom, Ginny Weasley and Luna Lovegood taught their fellow students what it truly meant to be brave. They taught them to defend themselves, to fight back, to refuse the easy path of surrender. Resistance survived in hidden passages, the ancient secrets of the castle that the Carrows could never fully police. Through these passages, Aberforth Dumbledore, watching from the shadows of the Hog's Head Inn, quietly supplied food and sanctuary. He kept their secrets, a quiet rebellion echoing his brother's great stand. The heart of Hogwarts refused to stop beating, and when Harry, Ron and Hermione finally returned, that heart exploded into a war. Aberforth, the reluctant brother of the fallen leader, opened the passage through the portrait of his sister, Ariana. He was tired and bitter. He had seen too much death. He knew what his brother had asked of Harry, but he could not turn them away. The spark of his consent ignited the castle. Aberforth, the revived Order, Dumbledore's army, the students, the teachers and the families answered Harry's return. The Patronuses flew across the country. Kingsley Shacklebolt's voice boomed, a warning that the Ministry had fallen and that the enemy was coming. The Order assembled, but this time they were not a secret society. They were an army. The families of the Order came, Molly and Arthur Weasley refused to stay behind. They fought for their children. Charlie Weasley brought the dragons of the reserve. The teachers, led by Minerva McGonagall, expelled Snape and barricaded the ancient walls. The house elves, led by Creature, charged into battle with kitchen knives. It was a convergence of every thread of resistance that had been woven over the past 3 years. But the battle demanded a terrible toll. Remus, Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks died in the battle. Remus, who had spent his entire life believing he was cursed, who had finally found love and fatherhood with Tonks and their infant son, Teddy, fell fighting for a world where his son would not be judged for his blood. Tonks, his bright and daring wife, fell beside him. They left an orphan behind, a child who would know his parents only through the stories of the survivors. Fred Weasley was killed when a wall collapsed beside him. Fred was never a formal member of the Order of the Phoenix. He was a son, a brother, a friend, a businessman who brought laughter to the darkest times. He was just trying to protect his home. His death shows that allies beyond the official order pay the same price. The war did not distinguish between the official martyr and the accidental hero. The cost was the same. The Weasley family, the heart of the Order's support network, felt that loss most acutely. The battle culminated in the final duel. Harry walked into the Forbidden Forest to die, and he did not stay dead. Voldemort was defeated, his own killing curse rebounding upon him in the Great Hall. The Order of the Phoenix had fulfilled its purpose. The Ministry was rebuilt. Kingsley Shacklebolt became Minister for Magic. Harry and Ron became Aurors, hunting down the remaining Death Eaters. Hermione ascended through the ranks of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Arthur Weasley finally received the recognition he had long deserved. Molly Weasley, having faced Bellatrix Lestrange, became a legend of maternal ferocity. The Order officially disbanded, its members scattered back into their lives, carrying the weight of their losses. The Weasley family grieved Fred, but they held on to each other. Andromeda Tonks raised Teddy. Harry and Ginny married, breaking the cycle of loss by building a new family. The story of the Order of the Phoenix is not just the story of a secret society. It is the story of a network of love and loyalty that refused to be extinguished. It is the story of people who gave their lives not for a symbol, but for each other. And when the war was over, that network of love remained, quietly rebuilding the world. The legacy of the Order was not its battles, but the peace that followed, and the survivors who carried the memory of the fallen forward into a new age. On the 2nd of May, 1998, the Battle of Hogwarts reached its conclusion. Lord Voldemort fell in the Great Hall, his curse rebounding upon him, and the war the Order of the Phoenix had fought across 2 generations came to an abrupt and final end. The castle, which had stood for 1,000 years, was scarred and broken, its walls holding the echoes of the battle that had just been fought. The silence that followed was the silence of a world that had just been freed. It was a victory, but it was a victory measured in loss. Confirmed Second Wizarding War losses for the Order of the Phoenix were a roll call of the war's deepest wounds. Sirius Black, who had been the Order's most trusted confidant and Harry's godfather, had fallen behind the veil in the Department of Mysteries nearly 2 years earlier, killed by his cousin Bellatrix Lestrange. Emmeline Vance, a quiet and dedicated member, was murdered by Death Eaters in the summer of 1996 while carrying out a protective detail for Harry Potter. Albus Dumbledore, the founder of the Order, the greatest wizard of his age, was killed by Severus Snape on the Astronomy Tower, a death that was itself a calculated move in a deeper plan that would not be understood until the very end. Alastor Moody, the legendary Auror who had trained a generation to fight the dark arts, was lost during the escape from Prewett Drive. His body never recovered. Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks, husband and wife, fell in the final battle at Hogwarts, leaving behind their infant son, Teddy, a child who would grow up knowing his parents had died fighting for a better world, and Severus Snape, the man who had walked the narrowest of lines between light and dark, was killed by Voldemort in the Shrieking Shack. His memories, given to Harry in his dying moments, proved that his allegiance had never wavered. These were the confirmed losses, the names carved into the history of the Order. With Voldemort's defeat, the Order of the Phoenix had no further purpose. It had been formed to fight him, and he was gone. The secret meetings, the coded messages, the constant vigilance against an invisible enemy, all of it was no longer necessary. The Order of the Phoenix formally disbanded. Its members had fought for this moment, and now it was time to build the world they had fought for. Kingsley Shacklebolt, a calm and commanding presence who had served as Dumbledore's right hand, was appointed Minister for Magic. He took on the monumental task of reforming the Ministry of Magic, an institution that had been thoroughly corrupted by Death Eaters. Under his leadership, the ministry was slowly cleansed of its corruption. Justice was restored. Trust so badly damaged began to be rebuilt. Harry Potter and Ron Weasley answered the call to serve as Aurors. Their experience in the war, the years of fighting, the battles they had survived, made them uniquely qualified to hunt down the remaining Dark Wizards and uphold the peace they had secured. Hermione Granger chose a different path. She joined the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, where she worked tirelessly to fight for the rights of marginalized beings. House elves, goblins, werewolves, all those who had been overlooked by Wizarding Society found an advocate in her. The Order had always been about protecting the vulnerable, and Hermione carried that mission forward in her own way. Others found quieter paths. Arthur Weasley continued his work at the Ministry, a steady presence in a government that had been restored to integrity. Molly Weasley returned to the Burrow, the house filled with the laughter of grandchildren and the warmth of a family that had survived. Aberforth Dumbledore retreated to the Hog's Head, a quiet witness to the history he had helped to shape. The old headquarters at number 12, Grimmauld Place, sat quiet in its invisible corner of London. The house was no longer a fortress for a secret army. The portrait of Walburga Black, once perpetually screaming abuse from behind its curtains, had fallen silent at last. The house elf creature, who had been so bitter and isolated, had found a new purpose in the kitchen, wearing the locket of his former master, Regulus Black, a mark of pride for a house elf who had witnessed the redemption of his family. In the drawing room, the tapestry of the Black family hung on the wall. It was a vast and ancient piece of work, its golden threads mapping the bloodline of a proud and troubled family. But the tapestry was scarred. Burn marks covered the names of those who had rejected the pure blood ideology. It remained where it was, a silent record of the war that the Order had fought, not just against Voldemort, but against the old prejudices that had given him power. The Order of the Phoenix was never summoned again. Its members were no longer soldiers in a secret war. They were survivors, ministers, Aurors, parents, and friends. The house at number 12 stood as a quiet monument to the sacrifices the Order had made. The war was over. The Order had completed its purpose, and the wizarding world was at last at rest.